Ghost of Tsushima has achieved an extreme amount of success and critical acclaim. This statement holds especially true in the mind of the average player, currently sitting at a 9.2 user review score on Metacritic, which in case you didn't know, is the highest of any PS4 game ever. To be the most well-received PS4 game by fans is a remarkable feat, and Sucker Punch, the studio behind the game, should be proud of themselves. I even personally experienced others' level of love for this title. If you were on any gaming subreddit within the first month of release, it would be impossible not to be bombarded with screenshots and posts gushing about the game. So as an aspiring video game critic, I thought, why not give it a shot? If this level of praise is being shown, then clearly something about Ghost of Tsushima had to be exceptional. This statement even holds true. There is something exceptional about the title, and it could be seen at any point in the game. You're constantly assaulted by it, a never-ending reminder. I think you probably know what I'm about to say. Tsushima is an incredibly beautiful game. Probably one of the best looking I've ever played. The awe-inspiring landscape of this small island is captured in such a vivid capacity, it threatens to overwhelm you at times. It features a wide expanse of environments that all have their own distinct spark of originality. There's something to be appreciated just about everywhere. The beautiful hues of red from the Sakai clan cemetery, the absolutely stunning view from across a mountain, or even the simple serenity from a fog-infested forest. Any location could be used as the inspiration for an art piece. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the photo mode featured in the game was an immediate hit. Instead of actually playing the game, people were spending significant portions of their time trying to find the perfect angle for the best screenshot, so they could collect their magical internet points. We all know how valuable those are. If you've watched any of my other videos, what I'm saying may come as a surprise. I hardly ever talk about the visuals in a game, and that's more of a personal choice. I don't really care that much about the graphics of the games I play. As long as I view them as passable, it has no impact on my view. Sure, I'm willing to acknowledge when the developers manage to pull off a true feast for the eyes, but I don't put that much stock into it. I only view visuals worth talking about when they are ingrained into the game's very identity. There is something special about how the title uses the beauty of its world to enhance the overall experience. Open world games always have a direct focus on exploration, and Tsushima understands that the environments inside play a crucial role in providing the player an incentive to keep roaming around. Take a look at the scene leading up to the player gaining full control over Jin. There are a plethora of elements working in tandem to create such a powerful moment, but I want to stay with the topic at hand. The beautiful, lush landscape of the forest drapes Jin in shadows as he rides on with resolve. As he travels on, the hills recede, revealing a brilliant field of pompous grass. The events leading up to this moment have been tragic, but as you enter this field and the music crescendos, you can't help but feel a rush of emotions. The darkness gives way to light, showcasing the true beginning of Jin's journey, and perhaps the first glimmer of hope that these impossible odds are in fact achievable. There's also a degree of wonder as you gaze upon the foggy landscape in the distance. What kind of secrets will this foreign world hold? What other sights will I see, and who will I share them with? Everything about this moment is cinematic in nature, and does a phenomenal job making the player want to see what is in store for them. Geez, are you hearing this BS? Darkness giving way to light? White grass representing hope? I came here for a critique and not some vague, flowery gibberish about how fog is mysterious. I just wanted to hear this nerd out for 5 minutes, but it seems he couldn't even manage to entertain me for that long. Alright, I guess it's time to stop this circus act. Ghost of Tsushima may be a visually impressive game that has captured the hearts of millions of people as their game of the year. However, I can't help but ask the question, is this what a masterpiece looks like? Was this really one of the best games to come out in the last year? Many people are probably shaking their head yes, like, oh come on Angle, game of the year, game's amazing. And I just find that to be so incomprehensible. A masterpiece needs to be groundbreaking, and suffice to say, Ghost of Tsushima is one of the safest games I've ever played. Besides its beauty, I find Tsushima to simply be just another Ubisoft Assassin's Creed-like clone that does absolutely nothing to alter the formulaic gameplay loop we have become so accustomed to. I want to make myself clear here. I'm not saying this is a bad game. However, for something to be nominated as Game of the Year, to be the most well-received PS4 game of all time, and to be casually called a masterpiece by so many, well, that game has to be special. Maybe you don't have to reinvent the genre, but it has to take that formula and add in some variables, breathe some life into an overdone, decaying model that is falling apart at the seams. Tsushima doesn't just not achieve this, but it adheres to the basic formula like it's gospel. It's filled to the brim with boring quests, copy and paste side objectives, and an extremely repetitive gameplay loop that never adds in any substance after the first third of the game. That's not to say the title doesn't do anything well at all. There are plenty of good things to say about Tsushima, and rest assured, I will be going over them. But a significant portion of a game can't be mediocre and still be associated with the term masterpiece. Instead, the word that comes to mind is simply just average. I'm making a lot of bold claims and have most likely incited some kind of outrage from a non-zero percentage of people. So how about I actually get to the point where I talk about the game? One thing I will ask from you is to keep an open mind. The purpose of this video isn't to just go on a long tangent about how this game sucks and why you should rethink your life choices for enjoying it. I'm not trying to invalidate your experience with Tsushima or really even convince you that I'm right. The reason for this, much like any of my videos, is to provide you with a more critical perspective of the game. Maybe you only agree with 10% of what I'm saying, but at least for that small percentage, some confrontation of previously held views occurred. In return for your open mind, I'll make good on my promise not to just endlessly filibuster about why this title isn't special. Alright, now that you and I have this completely unilateral agreement that I have no way of enforcing, let's begin, shall we? Spoilers for the entire game, by the way. The opening to Ghost of Tsushima achieves everything a successful introduction should. It hooks the player in immediately with a grandiose carnage-ridden battle that perfectly showcases the main theme and context behind most of the events of the game. Throughout the multiple times I've watched this scene, it's always invoked this feeling that I'm watching a movie rather than playing a game. The samurai of Tsushima are in a hopeless battle against the overwhelming might of the Mongol Empire. This is perfectly personified by the scene of a small ragtag group of samurai transitioning to the endless amount of Mongol ships. Jin isn't joking when he says today, he dies for his people. The murder of Lord Adachi serves a strong purpose. It demonstrates to Jin and the player that tradition, courage, and honor mean absolutely nothing to the people invading your home. All that matters to them is your complete and utter submission to their rule. There are no lines they won't cross, no precedent they won't break. The samurai see their values as making them morally superior. They may fall, but at least they died with honor, respect, and dignity. Disgracing oneself is a fate worse than death for them. Tsushima will make this point multiple times in the future, but blindly adhering to this code of ethics has a massive consequence. It makes your actions predictable and easily counterable, a deadly flaw to have in any war. Practically every samurai that walked onto that beach would never see another day. The juxtaposition of these two ideals is fundamental to the narrative behind Tsushima, so it is crucial the player immediately understands what each side represents. The way in which Lord Adachi is cast aside like a human swatting a fly is an extremely effective way to communicate this to the viewer and manages to captivate them. The other purpose of the intro is to establish Khoten Khan. It isn't often that a video game villain actually manages to draw my attention or make me want to see more of them. But thankfully Khoten isn't your average antagonist. One might expect the leader of the Mongols to be a ruthless barbaric monster whose one joy in life is bringing misery, destruction, and death upon all who get in his way. This concept has been done an uncountable amount of times and is incredibly dull, often giving no real motivation or substance to the character. They're inhuman monsters that no one can empathize with whatsoever because they don't act like a person any of us have ever encountered. Khoten is an entirely different kind of monster, one who uses destruction as more of a tool to get his way rather than just for his entertainment. You may not be able to empathize with Khoten, but it is undeniable that he has a charismatic aura about him. The way he talks to Lord Shimura demonstrates this perfectly. He looks Shimura in the eyes and addresses him with respect, calling him a warrior and even acknowledging his past military accomplishments, attempting to appeal to Shimura's warrior upbringing and ego. However, he then immediately turns this in his favor. Shimura may think of himself as an accomplished commander, but he is no match for a man that knows his first move before he even thinks to make it. Khoten's words literally make Shimura sweat. This entire speech is calculated. Khoten doesn't really care about Shimura, and I highly doubt he truly respects him. Everything is done in the name of his true goal, to cease Shimura's resistance and obtain his cooperation in his invasion. You can't help but want to see more of this guy even if his methods towards achieving his aspirations are abhorrent. All of his actions are meticulously crafted in a way that exemplifies his character perfectly. The way he swaggers up to Adachi and casually burns him alive like it's nothing to him perfectly showcases that this is a man who will do anything to succeed. Not just his speech, but the way it's delivered just oozes strength, confidence, and arrogance. The focus on his facial expressions demonstrates a calm and calculating man on the surface, but his brutish figure betrays a simmering ferocity hidden underneath. By the end of the intro, you know exactly who Kotan is, and you can't wait to see what he'll do next. This transitions into the aftermath of the battle at Komura Beach. Of course, Jin isn't dead and has been nursed back to health by an unknown figure. You won't have to wait to find out who that individual is. After a laughable hand-holding prompt, you enter the house and are introduced to another of the game's main characters. Yet again, Tsushima supplies a tremendous scene that establishes one of its main characters in a concise manner. Your savior initially comes across as weak, but is quickly shown to be a cunning opportunist who isn't afraid to use darker methods to survive. The contrast from cowering in fear to her ruthlessly stabbing the Mongol in the stomach conveys that this woman can take care of herself. Yet again, I have to bring up the theatrical nature here. I feel as if I'm watching a scene from Borderlands when a character is first introduced. All that's missing is the name card dropping down accompanied by some witty statement describing her. Oh, by the way, did I mention she's Yunna? The next task on our agenda is escaping this Mongol-infested village and reacquiring Jin's sword so you can actually play the game. The player is taught the basics of sneaking around and learns a little bit more about Yunna's thief background in case the initial scene didn't tip you off. One thing of note is you can really see the samurai honor code at work with the way Jin immediately grows more suspicious of Yunna once he learns that she's a thief. Being more alert around a thief isn't abnormal, but Yunna did rescue him from Komura and spent a significant amount of time and resources nursing this stranger back to health. Something she really didn't have to do, which makes even Jin's slight change in disposition feel ungrateful. The honor code is not only a standard that the samurai live by, but it's something they force upon others through their judgment. If someone differs from the strict guidelines, a samurai considers them lesser even if the choice is between death or dishonor. This is highlighted further by Jin's absurd plan to go and storm Castle Kaneda by himself, and his comment about no one fighting back against the advancing Mongol assault. Jin finally gets his sword back, and with it comes a flashback sequence that serves as the tutorial for how combat will work in the game. I'll get this out of the way. The actual gameplay portion of the tutorial is fine and ultimately unremarkable. What I believe is commendable is how well the game mixes together Shimura and Jin's relationship alongside you learning the basic controls. You could already tell from the beginning that these two were close, but there's something special about how the game depicts the father-son relationship these two have. You can feel the warmth radiating from Shinra as he talks with and instructs Jin. He truly loves the child in front of him, and while he may be strict in his methods, he wants nothing but Jin to improve as a person and succeed. Although, the improvement Shimura may want from Jin may not be necessarily what's best for the youth. Everything sounds fine for the majority of Shimura's lessons. Don't fight dirty. Always set a positive example for your people. Learn how to control your emotions. However, there's one interaction that struck me on my second playthrough in particular. When going over the code of the Sakai family, Shimura asks Jin what honor means to him. Jin replies with protecting others, those who can't protect themselves. Shimura's response is what really grabbed my attention. It accurately encapsulates the main theme and sets the stage for Jin's primary motivation throughout the entire game. Shimura kind of shrugs off Jin's response to protecting others and tells him that the most important thing is to serve their lord faithfully by adhering to the honor code of the samurai. While the game portrays this in a teacher educating a student kind of way, I see it in a far more darker light. Let me ask this question. Who is Jin's lord? Well, he's called Lord Shimura for a reason, right? Basically what Shimura is saying here is to always strive to please him. Oh, how can you do that? By living your life in the exact way that I dictate and pressuring others to adhere to the strict guidelines that I impose. Being the lord of a people means your primary job is to act in their interests and protect them. However, Shimura, and really the samurai in general, are more interested in dictating to their people how they should live their lives rather than actually serving their interests. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole right now, as I want to focus on the introduction, but I want you to keep this in mind for the future. So now that you have a sufficient understanding of what the Samurai Code of Honor actually means, Tsushima begins to further hammer home the point that abiding by it isn't going to win the war. Yuna pitches the idea of sneaking up on the Mongols so they don't raise the alarm, and Jin, gung-ho now that he has his sword back, takes the first opportunity he gets to go full Samurai Honor mode on them. It works in the village, but you can kind of tell that the game is not so subtly hinting that this approach isn't what's needed. Castle Kaneda takes this idea and beats you over the head with it until your understanding is all but assured. Jin, like the idealistic idiot that he is, decides that storming the castle with only Yunna at his side, murdering every Mongol in his path, and killing Khotan Khan is the best plan of attack to rescue his uncle. Yunna, understanding that this is an absolutely terrible plan, tells Jin maybe they could sneak inside and no! We either rescue my uncle the honorable way, or the old man croaks. There is no other option. As you might have surmised, this plan fails in the exact way you would expect. Somehow Jin manages to make his way to the Khan without being cleaved in half, and then gets thrown off a bridge. Who could have foreseen these chain of events? Wait, just about everyone? I don't know, it was in the spirit of the moment. Look, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Don't judge me. Anyway, we get a flashback sequence where Jin fails to help his father in his time of need, resulting in his death and a brief funeral walk. Man, these white-robed characters really stand out from everyone else. Oh look, they even have names! They certainly won't come up again anytime in the future though. So how far are we into this video? Jeez, we're getting close to the 15-minute mark and I've only spoken about the opening moments of the game? We're gonna be here for a while, aren't we? Alright, so the reason I felt it was necessary to talk about the intro in such detail is because a lot is being set up here for the narrative. We're introduced to a few main characters, the antagonist, the central theme, and learning how to, you know, actually play the game.
I am Jin Sakai, nephew of Lord Shimura.
I've spent a great deal of time highlighting how Tsushima introduces its main cast and central themes. However, I've only slightly skimmed over how the title introduces gameplay to the player. Let's rectify that. The opening battle against the Mongols does have Jin fighting a few encounters, but it's definitely not meant to be a proper introduction. There's no health bar, or even a consequence for taking damage. You are told how to attack and block, but that really only serves as a way to further immerse the player in the battle itself. I don't want you to think this is criticism though. As I've said before, the purpose of the first couple of minutes is to introduce the setting, plot, and characters, not gameplay. The only reason you are given the ability to fight at all is because it provides the feeling of being in the heat of a battle rather than just watching a cutscene. This is handled pretty effectively, so I don't have any complaints. The starting village after the battle at Komura is when things start to pick up. Yunna holds your hand while sneaking around the village, essentially acting like a beacon for you to follow while the game ensures you have an understanding of how stealth is going to work. The first Mongol you come across is staring in your direction, bringing up the awareness bar. This is done organically. The game doesn't pause and provide an arrow with some text explaining what the pop-up on your screen is. It trusts that you are capable of understanding what it's trying to communicate. After this, Jin follows Yunna some more, showing the proper methods to keep out of the soldier's sight, and how forgiving the game will be. All in all, an effective method that gets the job done. The Uncle tutorial is pretty basic, ensuring the player has all the tools they'll need to survive. The attacking section's purpose isn't to teach you how to deal damage, you've already learned that. Instead, it teaches you that straight up assault won't do you much good. It then immediately gives you lessons in parrying and heavy attacks in order to show you the proper method. Once Tsushima is confident you've got this down, it allows you to test what you've learned through a one-on-one duel with Shimura. Yet again another effective tutorial that communicates how gameplay will work in a concise manner that doesn't insult the player's intelligence. Ghost of Tsushima handles introducing gameplay and the key narrative elements extremely well, at times perfectly mixing them together in harmony. You may also be experiencing some whiplash considering how negative the video opening was versus how I've been nothing but positive so far. The introduction and Act 1 are easily the best parts of Ghost of Tsushima in my eyes, and deserve a great deal of praise. This wouldn't be a fair critique if I didn't acknowledge all the good, so here we are. Now that we finally have access to the island of Tsushima, how about we discuss some of the exploration mechanics? Jin's dad, the wind, may seem like a trivial thing, but its implementation accomplishes an important task. It does a good job of engrossing you into the world of Tsushima by not making you constantly have to open the menu and look at the map. This is a problem plenty of games have solved, but I particularly like Tsushima's implementation. There's no HUD marker clogging up the screen that tells you where to go. Well, most of the time. Since you actually have to figure out which direction the wind is blowing, it feels a little more natural as well. This may seem like a minor detail, but if you think about how many times you'll be using this throughout a playthrough, suddenly this seemingly small decision begins to hold a lot more weight. Alright, maybe we can chalk this up to my own personal bias, but I like the wind being used to show you where to go, okay? Sue me. Tsushima also does a fantastic job of organically guiding you during the first hour of exploration. The Yunna quest is placed near you so you can gain access to the other half of gameplay, the stealth mechanics. Its placement in relation to the other side objectives is important as well. On your way to Yunna, you will most likely run into Traveler's Rest, which serves as an introduction to enemy camps. You learn that these camps exist, that you need to defeat them, and that clearing a camp of enemies creates a large fog explosion, revealing other hidden tasks in the immediate area. The placement of Sensei Ishikawa's quest also serves a similar purpose. In between Keshi Fishing Village and Hiyoshi Springs is a survivor's camp that is difficult to miss. The camp isn't particularly noteworthy, but what it does teach you is you can talk to people in order to learn about side quests or various side tasks such as hot springs. It also gives you the Traveler's Attire, which introduces you to armor and helps increase your ability to explore effectively. Lady Masako and the Golden Temple are placed further down for a reason as well. Masako acts as a beacon for you to head towards the location in the first place, while the temple serves as the hub area for all of Act 1. This includes the ability to use supplies and other materials found while adventuring to upgrade your tools. The player is intentionally given access to this later so they can obtain a better understanding of combat and acquire the various pieces of equipment that they can further upgrade. All of this is done to give you a strong sense of progression once you finally do reach the temple. You need time to gain new abilities and become comfortable with their usage so you know what works for your playstyle. Since equipment is enhanced through the materials acquired through completing content, the player has to actually partake in this, or finding this area feels substantially less impactful. To help further this goal, Ogawa Dojo, a large Mongol camp, is placed in the direct path to the Golden Temple and Lady Masako. This is a perfect opportunity for the player to test everything they have been taught, and provides a large number of resources to be used when they finally do reach the temple. So now you have a decent understanding of what's worth upgrading to you, as well as some resources to enhance yourself in a way that feels meaningful. Keeping with the idea of exploration, let's transition to another element that Ghost of Tsushima excels at, always giving the player something to do. I mentioned that the first Survivor Camp gives you your first NPC quest locator whose only purpose is to inform Jin on one event before returning back to the void from whence they came, but there are plenty of other methods the game employs as well. While you're riding from objective to objective, groups of enemies will generate. Completing these provides various rewards, but what's important for this section are the civilians captured by these foes. They yet again serve as a beacon for more content by marking additional tasks on the map for you to complete. This yellow bird will quickly become your best friend as it randomly appears, guiding you towards some nearby side task while you're traversing the island. Clearing Mongol camps helps with exploration by destroying the fog around the location, revealing any side task in the area. In the large camps you take over, NPCs will inhabit the cleared camp, providing the potential for them to give you even more markers on your map. The player is never just walking around from point A to point B with nothing substantial in between. There's typically some kind of question mark in between the next objective that makes you feel as if you are constantly accomplishing something between the main quests. Tsushima accounts for the chance that there isn't anything for you to do as well through the golden birds and the random Mongol encounters. If you haven't discovered something in the area, the game will literally just bring you to it or provide you with some randomly generated encounter to help ease the boredom. These fights further enhance this goal through the random peasants that can be rescued, providing you with even more content on the map for you to complete. In the rare chance all else fails, at least you can appreciate the beautiful scenery the island offers. I really can't understate how well Act 1 handles exploration. The way that content leads to more tasks for you to complete is skillfully done. It quickly snowballs, leaving the player a steady supply of things to do no matter where they choose to go. This combos well with how main quests are placed on the map. Rescuing Yunna's brother Taka and the Straw Hat mission are both placed near the bottom of Tsushima, a significant distance from Lady Masako, the closest main quest in comparison. However, the path south is accompanied by the price of iron, Force Tsushima, and the value of sake, which all lead further down, acting as a beacon to slowly guide you towards the main quests. This distance forces you to take part in the side content, which further enhances the experience in two main ways. The first is you actually feel like you're accomplishing something by slowly taking back the island from the Mongols and helping its people. This just so happens to be the entire motivation behind all of Jin's actions, so this definitely is a good thing. The other is to ensure the player is gaining enough tail and material so they feel as if they are actually progressing. This is ridiculously important because without this, Tsushima loses all of its variety in gameplay. Tail is basically experience. You get some whenever you complete tasks involving fighting Mongols. Along each level up are these checkpoints that result in a tech point. These points are used to give Jin more options in combat. For instance, you can assassinate an additional person if they are near one another. Whenever you do reach a new tail level, Jin gains some health or resolve and is given access to a new tool called a ghost weapon. These tools are what really provide any form of variety in combat, so it is essential that you increase your tail to gain more of these. Main quests increase your tail by a significant portion, but in order for progression to be properly paced in Act 1, side content content is going to have to be completed. I think this puts the placement of these quests and why the game is so obsessed with giving you side objectives into even more perspective. Every variable is taken into consideration in order to create a system that actively contributes to providing a strong experience for the player. I think that's enough about mechanics and how they bounce off of one another for now. How about we actually turn our attentions towards the events of the game? Where did I last leave off? Probably something to do with Yunna. So you meet up with the honorless thief and she informs Jin that she may have located her brother in a nearby Mongol camp. You guys go there, stake it out, and attack at night. Taka isn't there, and some prisoner you free tells you Taka might be in a distant town called Azamo Bay. Now of course I skipped over a major plot point here. Jin breaks his code and assassinates the entire camp from the shadows. The scene itself is well done. Due to the Shimura flashbacks, the player can truly understand what this means for Jin and feel his hesitation. When he finally does stab the soldier in the back, it isn't even clean. They both struggle, one to stay alive and the other to end a life. This action is so foreign to Jin that he doesn't even think to cover the soldier's mouth at first in order to muzzle him. He even awkwardly switches his weapon to his other hand so he can stab the resisting Mongol in the stomach. The attention to detail here is great and highlights the inner struggle the future Ghost is going to go through. While I believe the betrayal of this scene is handled well, the pacing of this event is far too quick for my tastes. The Samurai Code is an entire lifestyle, one Jin has been partaking in ever since his uncle indoctrinated him into the club. Every flashback sequence is Shimura teaching Jin about what it means to be a samurai and reinforcing those ideals onto the young impressionable youth. We may be over 20 minutes into this video, but believe it or not, this is the first real quest you will most likely partake in. Do I talk too much? Don't answer that question. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is the first hour of the game is filled to the brim with how important it is to live by these ideals for the samurai. Breaking them is virtually not an option. I mean, Jin runs into a fully garrisoned fortress and somehow thinks he'll rescue his uncle and escape unscathed. The guy's delusional. Immediately after this, he decides that all of a sudden the code that he was willing to die over can be bent. And by bent, I really mean snapped in half. I understand all of the samurai at Komoda were annihilated and Jin just failed to rescue his uncle. However, all of this happens so quickly that for the player it doesn't feel earned. You're beaten over the head with the idea that a samurai can never break their code, and then boom, Jin can slit the throat of every foe he comes across for the remainder of the game. Tsushima attempts to justify this quick transition by portraying Jin as constantly struggling with his actions. At random points in the beginning, Jin will say lines like he has to do this, or they'll briefly snap back to one of Shimura's lessons to Jin. They even made Jin deliberately inefficient at killing enemy soldiers at first and require you to upgrade your dagger to improve the speed of each assassination. I appreciate that they decided to implement these details, but it still doesn't solve the core problem that this transition is done too quickly. So all of Act 1 is centered around recruiting allies so you can give rescuing your uncle another attempt that will hopefully succeed. These lucky contestants are Sensei Ishikawa, Lady Masako Adachi, Yunna, and the Straw Hat Ronin. You're probably familiar with some of these names by now. Since Ishikawa is the first guy you'll most likely visit, let's move on to his mission. You learn a tiny detail before meeting the archery master that may not seem important but is fundamental to his character. The sensei used to be the bowmaster for Clan Nagao, an esteemed samurai clan, however he gave up the position and now lives in a modest shack on top of a hill. The initial meeting with Ishikawa is a bit awkward to say the least. He has you at bow point because he was apparently attacked by bandits, and once the situation is de-escalated, he asks you to help him find his student. The quest itself isn't anything to write home about, but it achieves what it sets out to do well enough. Ishikawa teaches you the basics of using a short bow and the various ways to take advantage of terrain to defeat enemies. I personally forgot about the environmental effects immediately after this because simply shooting a guy in the head insta-kills any enemy except the large brutes and captains. I don't see much of a reason to meticulously observe your surroundings and then wait for a foe to walk past a hazardous area when you can just shoot them immediately and get it over with. The only advantage to these other options is killing a large group of Mongols at once. Since enemy camps typically don't have a large set of enemies together, this element of gameplay tends to get forgotten about. The actual plot of Ishikawa's quest is fine and serves as a good opening for the remainder of his other missions. His student Tomoe was taken by the Mongols, and in order to earn her freedom, she killed all of the other Japanese captives alongside her and agreed to teach them Ishikawa's way of the bow. He swears he will stop her, and Jin forces his way into helping. The only other thing worth mentioning is the sensei lied to you about being attacked by bandits and was instead ambushed by Tomoe. This creates a degree of contention between the two samurai, but nothing ever comes of it, so it's not particularly impactful. Since we're on the topic of Ishikawa, I might as well finish off the rest of his Act 1 content. The second mission features some quality bonding between the new master and student, where Jin pointlessly climbs a small cliff to appease the sensei, and then gets tricked into fighting a Mongol ambush by himself. This is all done in the name of training for Jin, but it's obvious that the sensei's methods are just a wee bit too extreme. What if Jin had died in the ambush? What if Ishikawa had just gone, oh well, another one bites the dust, and moved on? He's already lied to us once. I'm not feeling any particular sense of camaraderie between the two. After this, the pair follow some tracks to a small village, kill the Mongols, and a peasant tells them about overhearing something about Hiyoshi Springs. Ishikawa calls you out on your newly broken code, and you promise not to become a monster like Tomoe. The next mission has practically nothing happening in it. It primarily has Jin and the sensei wandering aimlessly looking for Tomoe while discussing how she is a born killer that is beyond redemption. You fight some Mongols, and one reveals a message telling Ishikawa that Hiyoshi Springs will beg for mercy just like the victims of Hiriori Nagao. Nagao. Now where have I heard that before? Anyway, this serves to create more distance between the two because Ishikawa isn't willing to divulge the truth behind this statement, and Jin knows he's lying. Again. Alright, I swear I'll actually start talking about all this once I finish going over the final Ishikawa task, okay? Scout's honor or something. So you meet up with Ishikawa at his dojo and plan your defense of Hiyoshi Springs. The sensei pitches letting Tomoe take the springs in order to make her cocky right after Jin gets finished saying how 2 skilled archers could hold off 100 men defending it. How does this strategy make sense? I don't know, man. I just make overly critical videos filled with snarky side comments because it brings me fulfillment or something. Jin compares his tactics to Tomoe, and the two go off to defend the springs after an initial ambush from the Mongols. You succeed in diverting the attack after an entertaining archery combat sequence, and you get your first glimpse of Tomoe. So that wraps up all the events, but now it's time to start asking the real question. Is any of this good? Well, I wouldn't say it's bad, but it isn't anything special. Mediocre sounds like a fitting description. Let me explain why. Ishikawa is supposed to be one of your ragtag JRPG party members that tackles the big bad castle at the end of Act 1. The problem is, there is no reason for you to trust this man at all. He actively lies to you multiple times and casually puts your life in danger for his own self-gratification. I know Jin will take anyone he can get, but I wouldn't feel comfortable putting my life in this man's hands. I mean, his own student tried to murder him, and the one before that led a brutal rebellion because he was inspired by the way Ishikawa conducted himself. He then decides it would be a good idea to let Hiyoshi Springs get captured because it would somehow make capturing Tomoe easier. How long until he decides luring us into a trap is a good way of getting Tomoe to reveal herself. This guy has the audacity to call us out on darting around like a thief? Sensei, why don't you check yourself, buddy? What's even more egregious is nothing ever comes of this. After this, you just keep working with Ishikawa to aimlessly hunt down Tomoe. There is no payoff or moment where Jin tells him that this behavior isn't acceptable or that they need to trust each other. I don't feel like this is a master and student relationship. It's more like some awkward agreement in order to achieve their goals. Speaking of teaching, does anyone even understand what Ishikawa's way of the bow is? How does it differ from normal archery? Besides firing at hornets' nests and setting grass on fire, I don't see anything that stands out. This being his legacy is a major plot point later in the game, and I can't even define one element that makes it unique. That is not acceptable. If we're looking at this from a gameplay perspective, I feel much more positive about Ishikawa's quests. What they excel at is creating situations where the player can use the bow to its fullest extent, instead of as a way to pick off enemies during a stealth gameplay section. The final assault on Hiyoshi Springs is a particular highlight. The introduction of fire arrows allows you to use a combination of grass burning alongside other strategies the game has taught you to fend off a moderately strong attack. The culmination of everything you've learned so far about archery feels like an appropriate last hurrah for Ishikawa's first act. It's also a different kind of gameplay section from the traditional run in and slaughter everyone or silently murder them all, which means it feels quite refreshing. Overall, the story and character interactions aren't particularly handled well, but from a gameplay standpoint, I found firing off rounds of arrows at foes to be enjoyable. Our next stop is recruiting Lady Masako of Clan Arachi after Ishikawa recommends looking for her. You stumble upon her estate, only to find it deserted except for some bandits who attempt to murder you. Jin follows a trail left by some horses and finally meets Masako. You learn from her that her entire clan, children and all, were murdered not by Mongols, but by their own people. Jin, being the guy who seems to have time for every little problem on the island imaginable, all but forces Masako to let him help. You ride to the Golden Temple, and Masako asks you to tell a monk named Sogen the fate of Clan Arachi. Jin suspects Masako isn't telling him all the details, but he goes along with it anyway. The interaction the two have is about as ordinary as the game, but ultimately serves a purpose. Masako informs you she suspects that Sogen was scouting out Clan Adachi's home right before they were attacked and used Jin as a way to spook him into doing something. What is it with your allies not being entirely honest with you? First Ishikawa, and now Masako? Gee, I hope this doesn't become a theme or something. You follow the monk to some bandit camp and massacre the place. Jin attempts to get information out of Sogen, but Masako can't contain her desire to gut the monk where he stands, so he kicks the bucket without revealing anything. The quest ends with you finding a list of names that could be potential co-conspirators to the annihilation of the clan. So I'm not going to do the walkthrough of every other side mission like I did with Ishikawa, because if I'm being honest, nothing of real value happens in Act 1, or really any of Masako's missions for that matter. Here's the quick rundown of Act 1 Masako. You spend the entire portion chasing after Sadao, the head of one of the farmsteads under Clan Arachi. You capture his wife, she gets killed by Sadao's brother Hachi, then the Mongols kill Hachi, the brother has a list of trade routes he follows, you use that to find Sadao, and Masako butchers him like the monk. When I first played Ghost of Tsushima, I immediately knew I didn't care for Masako, but I couldn't quite figure out why. Only on the second playthrough did I discover the reasons why I felt this way. The first is, much like with the sensei, I never felt like I was creating a bond of trust with Masako. The woman is consumed by her singular goal of avenging her family and has time for nothing else. Now this makes sense from a character perspective. It's understandable that you would want to avenge your murdered family, especially when they were Masako's entire world. However, there is no gratitude or mutual understanding created between her and Jin. I truly felt like I was just a tool to Masako, as if we signed a formal business contract to assist one another because it was convenient for both parties. There is one scene where Jin plays his flute to give Masako some comfort, but after this point, things are only going to get worse between the two. There aren't that many allies Jin recruits to help him throughout the game, so I view it as paramount that the ones you do spend time with actually feel like people you can rely on. Masako just doesn't supply this. She's cold, bloodthirsty, impatient, and at times completely unwilling to listen to reason. This is demonstrated from the very beginning when she murders the monk after he taunts her. I get why Masako commits the act, but the game will continuously pull this exact same scenario over and over again. She finds someone related to the murders and kills them before she can get any information that might lead to the person who actually orchestrated the plot to destroy her clan. This isn't a friend, just a revenge-driven machine who has been programmed for one singular goal. It's sad that Masako lost her entire family, and I get that, I really do, but the entire game is jam-packed with moments like these. There's a side quest where Mongols murder this poor guy's wife and kids. There's another quest where a young lady believes her father is murdered by Kappa demons. There's death everywhere you go on the island. Masako certainly isn't the only person who lost her family, and the player is in no way more connected to them than they are to any of the other random NPCs. There are bloody corpses lying in the middle of the road, and heads casually mounted on pikes. There needs to be a reason why I should care more about Masako's family over these equally tragic events. In order to do that, the player needs to build a relationship with Masako since her relatives are already dead. I've demonstrated the game does a poor job of accomplishing this, so I see no reason I should care more about Masako's loss than any other. The last issue is you do the exact same thing in every quest in Act 1. You trail after Sogen and then fight some bandits. You follow some bandits and then kill said bandits. The next quest, Jin and Co follow some tracks and fight some Mongols. In the final quest, you skip the trailing part and just walk up to the enemy camp and slaughter everyone. There's nothing unique here. It's literally the same thing over and over again with very few differences. So if the story isn't compelling and the gameplay is repetitive, I see very little reason to care about Masako's plight at all. So after enlisting the help of both Sensei Ishikawa and a revenge-driven machine, you have two choices, either help Yunna save Taka or find the Straw Hat Ronin. I want to discuss Taka and Yunna, so that's what we're transitioning to. What, you didn't think you had a say in the matter, did you? This is a video dictatorship after all. So you meet with Yunna near Azamo Bay where Taka is being held, and you're introduced to Kenji, the character with the most personality in the entire game. Among the endless supply of stoic, result-driven warriors found in Tsushima, Kenji is a most welcome change of pace. He's a morally gray merchant swindler who I can't help but enjoy spending time with, even if his actions typically put himself and others in danger. There's something about the mixture between his slimy nature and sense of humor that I just find so endearing. How do I put this into words? Oh, I got it. My feelings for Kenji are kind of similar to how Masako feels about ruthlessly butchering anyone who glanced in her family's direction before they were murdered.
The toll it took on my family. You were my friend.
Give me the monk.
No.
You brought this on yourself.
Alright, maybe I'm not that into Kenji. Getting to the point at hand, Taka is trapped in Azamo Bay, and Yunna's great plan is to use Kenji's cart in order to sneak in since the Mongols won't search it. Kenji is deeply against the plan, but Jin seems set on it, so he forced Kenji to march his latest shipment of sake straight into the city. Somehow things go off without a hitch. Jin and Yunna sneak around the city through an obvious laid out path by the devs, you rescue Taka, and quickly leave the city. So time to ask the question of the day. How am I going to be overly critical of this section? Well, I'm glad you asked. I could go on about how Jin just strolling up and going with Yunna's plan without any form of preparation feels absolutely absurd and makes no sense, but I know no one really cares about that point. Maybe I'll mention how simple it was for you to escape the city. To get in, we had to ride a cart and scale rooftops in order to avoid detection, but once we find Taka, suddenly we're running out of time. Okay, besides those two honorable mentions, this mission is fine. Sneaking around Azamo Bay does an excellent job of highlighting just how bad the invading force is for the people of the island. You get inside and immediately find out the Mongols burned half the town because the residents pissed them off. Then you see a woman get murdered for trying to run away from a soldier. Not too long afterwards, you casually watch civilians being shot in the head for refusing to become slaves. This serves a purpose outside of vilifying the enemy invaders. Jin is kind of unique among the samurai, in that he actually cares wholeheartedly about protecting people. Sure, the samurai drivel on about protecting their people, but it's more like a politician's platitudes rather than true dedication. While the game isn't making a big show of it, these forms of extreme punishment are a breeding ground for drastic measures and changes in thought. It pushes Jin to truly own up to his words all those years ago, to question the foundation of the society he has been raised in. Yet again, I'm not going to explore this point further. There are much better spots in the future. What I will say is at this moment, Tsushima does a fantastic job portraying the reason why Jin ends up becoming the ghost in the first place. He's one of the only survivors of Komona, which means he wasn't lucky enough to die. Instead, he has no choice but to remain and see firsthand what that failure has wrought. To watch the people of Tsushima suffer because of his failures. The other major strength is the bond between Yunna and Taka. Yunna is the overprotective older sister who will do anything for her brother. She's perfectly willing to throw herself into this ludicrous plan because in her eyes, every second Taka is stuck in that town not under her care is another second he's suffering. There is no time for careful planning, they need to do something now. I have to give the voice actress and writer some props here. The moment Yunna and Taka reunite, you can feel the relief in her voice. Whoever portrayed Taka also did an excellent job communicating his hesitation and fear. At one point, he will say that he forgot what it felt like to not constantly be in fear of his life, and I believe it. In general, the relationship between these two is one of the best things Ghost of Tsushima has going for it, and this quest doesn't waste any time demonstrating that to the player. So the next obvious portion to move on to is Ryuzo and the Straw Hat Ronin, but there's some unfinished business in Azamo Bay. By pure coincidence, that also happens to be the name of the side quest I'm about to go over. So I'm going to be blunt. Unfinished business is one of the worst side quests in the entire game. Essentially, what you do is sneak back into Azamo Bay, kill all the Mongols, and free everyone taken captive. Maybe some of you have connected the dots as to why this might be a problem. What did I just finish talking about? Oh yeah, sneaking into Azamo Bay and barely rescuing Taka without getting caught. However, here we are now, strolling on into a town that has no guards watching the entrance or posted outside. What happened to all of those guys 5 minutes ago? Doesn't matter, stop asking questions. So how do you get inside without Kenji's cart? Well, it turns out there's a hole in the wall that yet again no one is guarding, so you can kind of just swagger on in. Then you go about murdering every Mongol in the fortress town of Azamo Bay. Of course, Jin handles this without breaking a sweat, effortlessly murdering every Mongol he comes across and casually rescuing all the village leaders that are being held captive. Everything ends with a nice little mini-boss duel, and now the town is open for business, baby. As a gameplay section, this level is fun and entertaining for the player. However, from literally any other perspective, this is absolutely garbage. Why did we bother sneaking in through Kenji's cart if this was always an option? Why did we even need Yunna to come with us if we were perfectly capable of killing everyone in the town? We rescue all the hostages without anyone finding out. Why can't we just do the same with Taka? I think it's clear that this is a huge plot hole, but sadly, this is only the tip of the iceberg for this kind of problem. Jin is practically a god of death in this game, and maybe to some extent that's what they were going for with the Ghost legend. The thing is, it's at odds with another point Tsushima tries to make, that Jin wouldn't have been able to make it this far without the help of others. Sure, if Yunna didn't mend him back to health, he would have died at Komona, but other than that, what does anybody else really do that's all that important? Alright, onwards and forwards to the illustrious Straw Hats I keep mentioning. Jin travels to the Kishi grasslands and comes across his old friend Ryuzo, who has become the leader of the band of mercenaries. The two fight off a Mongol assault, and Jin pitches the idea that if they help him rescue Lord Shimura, they can have anything they could ever ask for. Ryuzo's open to the idea, but his first priority is his starving men. Jin comes up with the idea to steal food from a Mongol-controlled fort, and Ryuzo reluctantly goes along with it. The purpose of this initial meeting is to mostly set up events to come. The main plight is that the Straw Hats are starving, and until that problem is resolved, Jin won't be getting any assistance. You also gain an understanding of the relationship between Ryuzo and Jin. They're old friends, but you can definitely tell there's some kind of barrier between them. This is mostly shown through Ryuzo. You can tell there's a bit more to him not immediately agreeing to help Jin than just his starving men, and it becomes even more obvious through his overprotectiveness of his command over them. Overall, not much actually transpires during this quest, but it accomplishes everything it sets out to do rather well, so you won't be hearing any complaints from me. Moving on to the fort attack itself, not much of import really happens. Instead, it's filled with plenty of action-packed combat sequences. The ghost sneaks into the base and sets off a signal informing the mercenaries to attack. They take this section only to find most of the food is being transported somewhere else via ship. The two warriors decide to take a small boat out to the bay in order to stop this from happening. After a frantic search sequence, you finally find a ship with some supplies on it, only for it to get burned down by Mongols. The two swim back to shore empty-handed, but luckily Jin snagged a map that somehow survived the water and tells Ryuzo to use it to find some food. He reluctantly accepts and agrees to help Jin when the time comes. So there are a plethora of problems outside of paper somehow surviving a long swim through the ocean. The first is, why are we attacking Mongol strongholds in order to find food for Ryuzo's men? We have survivor camps all throughout the island, Golden Temple, countless villages the player has saved, and even potentially Azamo Bay. The entire premise for everything that happens here is that there is no other way for Ryuzo to get his men the supplies they need to survive, but that simply isn't the case. Another flaw is, how were the two of them even going to get food off the ship? Were the two of them just gonna sail the boat away? Now, I'm no boat expert, but I doubt that's even possible. If they were merely going to bring it back to shore, how are they going to get past all the soldiers? Actually, no, clearly Jin can just kill all of them effortlessly, so that's not a problem. The point is, the plan was even more absurd than you probably initially realized, because there was no way they were going to ever get Ryuzo's food. Instead, it's a high action moment just for the sake of it with no real stakes. The gameplay is highly entertaining to go through, and I definitely felt the frantic scramble to find something to help Ryuzo's men, which is a good thing, but if the entire reason for doing it in the first place doesn't make any sense, the entire section falls apart. With this shaky agreement, our time with the Straw Hats is at an end, well, for now. Now the game shifts back to Yunna and Taka. Jin wants something that will allow him to scale the walls of Castle Kaneda, and Taka just so happens to be an amazing blacksmith. He can make you a tool, but he's going to need your help to find his assistant. Okay, I found them, but wait, the assistant's wife and her sister have been taken by Mongols. You have to save them. Alright, so they get saved. Oh, about that tool. Yuna left and hasn't come back. Can you look for her? Taka, what do I look like to you? A charity case? Don't answer that question. Alright, I got Yuna, and so help me God, if this forge isn't on in the next 2 seconds... Why didn't I die at Komeda? Putting the humor aside, this back and forth of going to the forge, saving someone, fighting Mongols, and repeat is terrible. These pointless filler peasants mean nothing to me and only serve as an arbitrary quest extender. The point was to have a bunch of people see Jin's new tactics, causing Yuna to start the legend of the ghost, but the ends don't justify the means here. I think it would have been a lot more interesting if Yuna and Taka were found outside Komatsu Forge with a bunch of peasants. The Mongols held the town and even had some of the townspeople held hostage. You and Yuna devised some kind of plan to defeat them that isn't just Jin sneaking in and killing everyone for the 100th time. Perhaps the two of you get caught trying to get the captured peasants back to safety and are forced into a big brawl with the remaining Mongol forces. This takes place near the entrance of the village, so all the other islanders get to watch the fight. Picture archers on rooftops, waves of enemies coming to fight you, and it all culminates with one of these cool one-on-one duels the game likes so much. Then having Jin and Yuna fend off the Mongol forces occupying the townspeople have the same reaction they did here, and Yuna starts the ghost legend. This makes a lot more sense than just some random Mongols appearing inside the otherwise empty town harassing random peasants, and you don't have the annoying repetitive gameplay the original quest featured. The final matter at hand before Jin attempts his storming of Castle Kaneda a second time is rescuing Ryuzo's captured men. Let's backtrack a little. After defeating all the Mongols in Komatsu Forge, Ryuzo comes sprinting in begging for Jin to do something about his men getting caught. Since the newly crowned ghost feels somewhat responsible because he's the one that gave them the map that had them attacking the Mongols, he agrees. The real purpose of all this is to teach the player how to use the grappling hook that Taka just finished making. Jin sneaks into the camp using the newly crafted tool, frees the mercs, and that's just about it. Another standard enemy camp that you've most likely cleared out tens of times before. Alright, there is one key detail here. For some reason, the Mongols fed the men that were captured. Certainly nothing to worry about for the future though. So here we finally are. The big moment. The moment of truth. The moment. What am I even doing? Alright, so it's time to rescue Big Papa Shimura from the Mongols. Are you excited? No, I don't think that's the word I would use. So you meet up with all your allies near the castle, and surprise, surprise, the Straw Hats are nowhere to be seen. Well, I'm sure they just got lost or something. Good old reliable Ryuzo would never betray Jin. So without the Straw Hats, the plan is for Jin to sneak in and stop the Mongols from being able to raise the alarm at the front of the castle. Then the rest of the party comes running in, and they kill everyone else until they reach Shimi. Maybe you didn't realize it while playing the game, but this is a terrible plan. Honestly, it's not even really a plan. Something of this magnitude would require days of preparation, people scouting around the camp, getting an understanding of guard rotations, and the general layout of the enemy. We don't have any of this, we're just waltzing on in and winging it. Turn off the alarm and then just kill everyone? Maybe if we're a small army, instead we're 4 fighters. Oh wait, I forgot. Jin makes up for about 200 guys, so I guess we do have a small army. Never mind, everything's fine. Then there's what actually happens once you get inside. To my astonishment, this mission is entirely Jin focused with hardly any help from your friends. After you silence the alarm, Sensei Ishikawa gets sent off to guard the entrance with Kenji of all people. What's Kenji going to do? Offer them a drink and sing Kumbaya while Ishikawa picks them off from a distance? You fight with Vengeance the character for about 5 minutes before you tell her to man a Hawacha to cover your and Shimi's escape. Does the player know what a Hawacha is yet? No, but thinking or asking questions only keeps Shim in the Mongols' hands for longer. We gotta run in with no plan or else something bad besides the island's last hope dying will happen. What happens to Masako here is even worse when you finally rescue Shimura. What I mean is, she doesn't even cover your escape. She just runs in with everyone else in some big final confrontation showdown. What was the point of her staying behind? It seems more like a pointless excuse to get rid of Masako rather than something important. Was there something before Jin reunites with his uncle? I feel like I'm forgetting something important. Oh, Yunna, I completely forgot about you. I got so caught up in massacring the entire camp by myself that I forgot to open the door for you. Don't mind the blood and guts everywhere, you know, I'm just doing my thing. You're standing behind a door waiting for me to do everything, you know, we're both just doing what we're good at. Alright, I'm being a bit of a jerk here. Everyone's practically useless here, not just Yunna. Sorry, I just couldn't help myself. If I put away all of my sarcastic quips, and stop making myself look like an arrogant fool, I really do feel this way about how Jin's allies are treated. The entire point of Act 1 was for Jin to gather allies and resources so he could stand a chance at actually rescuing his uncle. The ghost has improved significantly in terms of pure combat prowess, however his friend showing here is pathetic. What was the point of helping Sensei Ishikawa, Masako, Yunna, and Ryuzo if when they finally are needed, Jin does all the work anyway? I'm getting some serious Osmo Bay vibes from the storming of the castle, and that is never a good thing. For all we know, Ishikawa does literally nothing. Masako and Yunna team up with us for a couple of minutes before they get shelved, and Ryuzo, well hey, let's talk about Ryuzo, shall we? So Yunna's moment of fame ends with Jin telling her to guard an area that shouldn't even be seeing reinforcements since we left both Masako, Kenji, and Ishikawa behind us, but hey, I've belabored this point enough. Jin sneaks in through this hole in the fence and is immediately confronted by Ryuzo. Hey buddy old pal, where ya been? I knew you took a wrong turn somewhere and got lost. Nobody would listen to me, but I believed in you. Hey, why aren't you saying anything? Why are you raising your sword? Who could have foreseen this chain of events? Jin begs for his friend to help him, but Ryuzo isn't having any of it. An admittedly great boss fight ensues, and once Jin claims victory, Ryuzo runs away while alerting the remaining Mongols about his presence. The biggest issue with this fight, besides Yunna being within shouting distance, is the Straw Hat leader's motivation. He begins by saying that he had to feed his men, but Jin counters with the logical argument of, if you free Lord with a capital L Shimura, then he'll easily feed all of your starving men. When Ryuzo sees no way to counter this, he moves the goalpost by saying Shimura will send them off to die in some pointless battle. Now I agree with Ryuzo here. Shimura would definitely do this. The problem is what makes him think the Khan wouldn't do the same. He must know the warlord merely sees sees him as a tool to be exploited. At the very least, if you die fighting for Shimura, he would say you were a great warrior who died with honor, respect, courage, and whatever other nonsense he would spew. Koton would probably just stampede his army's horses over your bodies and say it was a burial. I get that Ryuzo thinks the Mongols will win, but his group of soldiers are easily the most expendable of all Koton's men. If he ever needs to sacrifice a couple guys for a tactical advantage, you better believe the Straw Hats will be the first to go. The entire confrontation is just illogical and makes little sense when you put it under any form of scrutiny. Actually, that's true for just about this entire quest now that I think about it. I want to take a moment to address the actual fight that takes place with Ryuzo. The battles themselves don't allow the player to use any ghost weapons, which means the only options you'll have are attacking, deflecting, and dodging. In general, most enemies cannot simply be attacked. They require you to create some kind of opening, or else they'll just block. In these duels, that means either dodging or deflecting their offense. The limitations of one's options is fundamental to the design of these encounters. Being able to bully the boss by constantly stunning or throwing them around would eliminate all the challenge. Instead, the player has to rely solely on their ability to react to the enemy's moveset. In a vacuum, each of these encounters is enjoyable and well designed. The battles have a focus on speed, and if you can't quickly decipher when exactly to dodge or parry a strike, you're going to have a bad time. Once you get this down, the fights quickly pick up a rhythm. You parry an attack, get some blows in, and the boss immediately attempts to cut off your offense with another assault. This loop continues until you either make a mistake or the boss backs off. It's this loop that feels so great. Making a mistake feels critical, especially on the highest difficulty where one strike can end an entire run. The speed of healing in Ghost of Tsushima is very generous, allowing you to even regenerate health when in the middle of an animation. This may give off the impression that combat would be too easy, but that isn't true. Instead, it reinforces this focus on a quickly paced duel. Having to run back and perform some healing animation would only hamper the feel of the fight Tsushima is going for. While it is true that backing off and taking a breather is necessary, it never lasts very long. This is because of the quick healing factor, allowing you to immediately jump right back in for another go. The point of this is to truly capture the essence of a duel, and Tsushima just knocks it out of the park. However, there is a big but to this. It's a problem that will come up time and time again throughout this video. All of these encounters feel exactly the same. The moves they use are copy and pasted from one another with only some minor differences added in. Sometimes the bosses themselves are just a beefed up version of a foe you can normally encounter. For instance, this shield guy can be found many times throughout Tsushima outside of a duel. This dramatically hampers the enjoyment of these fights. If you already know the entire enemy's moveset, then you know the exact window when to counter, or what they'll follow up with. This doesn't completely eliminate all form of challenge or even enjoyment because of the focus on speed. Just properly responding to what a boss dishes out can still prove challenging even if you're familiar with everything they can do. I also found that I never really tired of the duel-like rhythm either. So while the fights do feel very cookie cutter and repetitive, the main appeal is so addicting that I never found myself bored. This does speak to how well Sucker Punch designed these encounters, however, I can't help but feel they would have been much stronger if more effort was put into designing their movesets. After facing your ex-best friend, Jin fights through a room of Mongols before finally achieving the goal of Act 1. The two samurai fight their way to the edge of the camp, when suddenly all of the other side characters spontaneously appear for a big final showdown. The heroes prevail, and Shimura declares the castle theirs. I think the primary flaw of this mission is the complete and utter lack of help from any of your allies. I'm willing to look past the plan being a suicide mission if it properly let everyone have their moment to shine. I've already said this, but I think it's really important, so here I go again. The entire purpose of Act 1 was to recruit friends to help rescue Lord Shimura. If the people Jin recruits don't actually end up doing anything meaningful during the rescue, it defeats the entire purpose of gathering them to begin with. All that hard work completely down the drain because no one was utilized properly. Instead, we just have Jin hulking up and doing everything on his own with barely any help from others. The player doesn't always have to be in the spotlight. Other characters are allowed and should have their own moments to shine. We're fighting a war against an unstoppable force. It is absolutely absurd that one man could defeat them all. The ghost isn't infallible, he's just a normal person. People make mistakes and rely on others when something they can't handle appears before them. I'm not trying to argue that the game needs to be more realistic in terms of its combat sequences, that's just being nitpicky and ruins the appeal. All I want is for the game to actually have Jin rely on people when it says he needs them, rather than just having them stand around looking important while he does everything. So with Shimura rescued, Act 1 comes to a close, or that's what I would like to say, however there are still 2 more moments worth discussing. The first is what happens directly after Shimura is rescued. Kodan Khan is outside the gates of Castle Shimura, which if you can't already tell by the name is Shim's seat of power on the island. The Khan is trying to reason his way into the garrison letting him inside, but it isn't going well for him. He decides they need a little motivation, and he tasks his newfound ally Ryuzo with providing that incentive. That motivation just so happens to be burning people alive until the garrison can't watch anymore. Not too surprisingly, this is a pretty persuasive act, and the Japanese begrudgingly open the gate. There's a lot going on in this quick scene, and most of it is pretty good. I haven't mentioned it, but Tsushima has been showing some brief moments between Shimura and the Mongol leader. They aren't too important, but they further highlight Kotan's ability to manipulate people by either giving off the impression that he's a reasonable warlord who wants to end pointless bloodshed, or highlighting his ruthless nature when that act fails. The Khan doesn't care at all about these people or their struggles. All he wants is to conquer Japan in the most efficient manner possible. It just so happens that appealing to people's desire to not die for pointless causes is the best way of achieving that. This scene does a great job of continuing this continuity. I'm always struck by the facial expressions the warlord makes. He seems so casual and unfazed, as if he's asking the garrison if they'll buy some of his Girl Scout cookies. There's a noticeable change when he's pleading for the soldiers to stand down and save their people. He looks genuine, like he really doesn't want all these people to die. Of course that statement isn't true, but a good actor needs to be able to play the character fully, right? Once this appeal fails, it's back to business as usual. Calm, collected, and calculating. Completely unfazed by their denial. I also love the way he tells Ryuzo to earn the food for his men. There's such a contrast between the pleading for less bloodshed versus the ruthless burn these people alive if you know what's good for you. Another great performance for the Khan. Of course we aren't finished here. Ryuzo still has to burn these people. His people. Immediately you can feel the struggle and conflict the swordsman has for what he is about to do. The slow crawl towards the stake that will become this guy's grave and the begging from this poor man are powerful indicators. As Ryuzo watches this human burst into flames, the game takes its time to yet again focus on facial expressions. Now I personally don't care much for Ryuzo, and we'll get to that later, but just look at that expression. You can feel the regret and pain that he is going through. When he looks back at the Khan, it's a plea. Please don't make me do this. Kotan may pretend to be somewhat benevolent, but these eyes have no mercy right now. Faced with the reality that he has no choice but to continue murdering people in such an agonizing fashion, Ryuzo grows hysteric.
Open the gate! Open the gate!
As Ryuzo falls to his knees in relief, the Khan struts in, casual, unfazed, like he just made a killing off his cookie empire. The closing portion of Act 1 sets a far more uplifting tone. It focuses on Jin and Shimura's exploits to take a nearby fort back from the Mongols. It begins with a conversation between Yunna and the invincible samurai. Jin wants to know if Yunna will continue to keep assisting him in the fights to come, but Yunna just wants to get as far away from the war-torn island as possible. As expected, this disappoints the ghost, but he accepts her answer. We transition to what appears to be the first real conversation Shims and Jin have had since the rescue operation. There's 2 main takeaways here. One is that Shimura doesn't want Jin to continue being the ghost, and that he won't let Yunna get off the island unless she helps him retake his castle. This is where the first hints of who Shimi really is come into play. He talks a big game about leading by example and courage and honor and whatever, but deep down he's really a prejudiced elitist lord. Yunna already risked her life to help save yours, now she has to help retake your castle? This is a completely unreasonable request, and the game knows this. You're supposed to feel for Yunna here, and Tsushima does a good job of portraying this. This conversation transitions to a riding section where the 2 family members continue to converse about Yunna. Jin calls her brave, loyal, and good in a fight, but all the lord sees is that she's a thief. It doesn't matter that she has been fundamental to Jin's survival, or that she assisted him in his own rescue. Once you've been branded with the label of dishonor, you might as well be the mud his horse tramples over. This disdain for her is shown even further when Yunna comes to assist them in taking the area. The best compliment that he can come up with is that she was a good distraction. He then essentially tells her that lords are talking and that she should get lost once she's said her piece. This blatant disregard for one of the people you should be most grateful to is really telling about his character. Shimura loves talking to Jin, or other people he views as living upstanding, honor-filled lives, but once anyone that doesn't fit his ideal member of society comes around, suddenly they should be shunned and looked down upon. His worldview is as black and white as it gets, with little room to budge. The other main purpose of this sequence is to begin Jin's struggle with remaining an upstanding samurai versus immersing himself in the ghost identity. This will be the theme of Act 2, and the game isn't wasting any time. Shimura is constantly reinforcing that the samurai are the ones that need to save Tsushima, not some urban legend like the ghost. The people need to respect the samurai and look to them for guidance because without them, there is only anarchy. There is no room for new tactics or experimentation. Fight the way you've always fought and never break the code. Yunna represents the opposing side. She's the exact opposite of Lord Uncle, a lowly thief without any fame or prestige to her name. She pushes Jin to find new ways to defeat the invaders and constantly supports his actions as the ghost. Yunna even pitches the idea of recruiting the people of Yarikawa, a samurai clan who rebelled against Shimura to help fight the Mongols. She is the embodiment of breaking the status quo and welcoming change. Both of them are playing a game of tug-of-war with Jin here, clashing with each other in just about every way imaginable, with the ghost forced to be the mediator between the two. Except he won't be able to play the diplomat forever, and eventually he's going to have to pick a side. For now, Tsushima lays a solid foundation for the future with this final quest. I don't have much in the way of criticism, so yeah, good job game. With Act 1 coming to a close for real this time, I want to pause the story elements and take some time to discuss gameplay. Throughout all of the first act, the game is constantly introducing the player to new content, side quests, important characters, ghost tools, sword forms, and these small side objectives. There's so much to see and explore, and it all feels fresh. Sadly, the same cannot be said for Act 2. The biggest issue Ghost of Tsushima has is one that has plagued its genre for years, that being its complete and utter lack of variety in gameplay. I'm taking the time to go over this now because this is the point in the game where this problem becomes painfully obvious. Just about everything you will be doing is something you have already done in Act 1 with very little in the way of change. Let's take a more in-depth look at combat. A lot of what I said about boss duels applies here. The same fast-paced duel-like system is still all the same, only now there are some more layers added on. In the beginning, Jin can only perform the basic options I laid out earlier. You know, dodging, blocking, etc. This leads to a very reactive combat system. What this means is the player can't do much against foes until they perform some kind of action. You know, you're reacting to the enemy. Jin straight up attacking a Mongol soldier doesn't accomplish much as they just block. It's reliant on you to parry or dodge out of the way in order to create that opening. Although there is an element of combat I haven't mentioned yet, heavy attacks. These allow the player to stun an opponent, giving you free range over them. So you may be thinking, doesn't this eliminate the whole reactive system? I mean, forget parrying, I'll just break every foe's guard. Well, in a one-on-one encounter that is kind of true. It's extremely simple to just steamroll some goon. That's why the overwhelming majority of encounters are filled with multiple enemies. Think about it, every time you come across a random group of soldiers, it's always a pack of at least 4 to 5. The reason for this is, the player is forced to find the opening among the massive bodies that want to end them. Even if you do manage to find it, the length of it is rather short. So you can break up a guy's guard, but odds are you won't be able to land the finishing blow without being interrupted. This is where dodging and parrying comes back into place and the speed factor returns. You yet again get back into this rhythm. Deal some damage to a guy, respond to an enemy attack, counter, repeat. Of course, there are some other elements factored in as well. You have to constantly watch the crowd of enemies circling you, not just to find an opening, but to ensure you don't leave yourself exposed either. What I'm getting at here is greed can lead to big consequences. Factor in some attacks being unblockable, and you might find yourself fishing for a parry only for you to eat dirt. Ultimately, combat is a juggling act of knowing when to go on the offensive and when to curtail your impulses alongside learning the timing for attacks. The timing element relies heavily on variety in movesets, and suffice to say, standard fights don't have much going for them in the variety department. This is prevalent in the amount of enemies you can encounter as well as what attacks they perform. There are swordsmen, dual-wielding swordsmen, archers, spear guys, big brutes with shields, shield guys, straw hats, and whatever these explosive throwing dudes are. As you progress, tiered versions of these types of foes appear where the only real difference is what they're wearing and maybe a move or two. The change from Tier 1 to Tier 2 is a little more drastic and is serviceable enough in my eyes considering these armorless goons are pretty pathetic in terms of challenge. However, the change from Tier 2 to 3 is just more health and damage. Noticeably, the spear enemy's offensive capabilities are increased, but most enemies remain carbon copies of themselves. This continues throughout the remainder of the game with very little variation in their movesets. So while the need to perform that juggling act still remains, the actual offense you'll have to deal with always stays the same. This is a pretty big flaw because the player doesn't have to learn anything new about any of the foes they'll be facing. It's the same song and dance every fight with the only source of variety variety being the enemy composition or the juggling act itself. Since there aren't that many different types of soldiers, the only thing that stops combat from devolving into what feels like the same fight every time is the randomness of juggling offense and defense. The Mongol soldiers are always going to be positioned differently, and the attacks you'll have to overcome are never the same. It's these unknown variables that keep combat enjoyable despite all of these flaws, because it creates what feels like something close to a unique encounter every single time. Although there is another issue that could potentially plague this system. Having too many enemies leaves no room for the player to ever get any offense in because they're constantly being bombarded by attacks. The reason for this being, your offensive capabilities are designed for fighting one foe at a time. That's kind of odd considering the game was designed around multiple enemy encounters, but hey, it's still true. Jin can only focus on one soldier at a time using his more typical methods. Luckily, ghost weapons bypass this issue entirely by giving Jin the ability to either stun or damage more than one goon at a time. This helps level the playing field by giving the player the ability to create multiple openings for them to exploit or just to take some soldier out of the equation. Ghost weapons prove their necessity by pumping some options into the block, parry, dodge fest that is the game. So now there's another variable added to the juggling act in order to spice up each encounter. The problem with ghost weapons is 3 out of 5 of them do the exact same thing in the exact same way. These tools are kunai, sticky bombs, and black powder bombs. Each one serves the purpose of inflicting damage, stunning foes, or doing a combination of both. Kunai just automatically target up to 3 guys, and instantly take them out of the equation for a period of time. Black powder bombs focus more on damage, but if upgraded can leave opponents in a knockdown state that allows you to insta-kill them. Sticky bombs are really just a worse version of the black powder bomb. A soldier is stuck with a bomb which eventually explodes over a brief period. The reason they're worse is, black powder bombs allow you to pick exactly where to throw them and explode on impact. The sticky bomb targets a random foe the camera is facing, meaning you aren't guaranteed to stick the guy you want. Also, since the explosion is delayed, there's the potential that the men around the stuck enemy may move away, or the target himself may move somewhere less desirable. The black powder bomb eliminates all of these problems by just allowing you to pick and choose where it goes. The kunai are also vastly inferior because you yet again don't get to choose who they target, and they're limited to hitting only 3 soldiers. The black powder bomb's explosion is huge and can hit any amount of enemies, meaning it's superior in every way. The game yet again has another variety problem because most of these weapons do the exact same thing, with one clearly being more qualified for the job, meaning players will often throw down a black powder bomb when in a sticky situation rather than any of the other options. The only exception to this is the smoke bomb, another ghost weapon. This tool allows Jin to reset an encounter by blinding enemies around him. It can also give you an opportunity to escape a dangerous situation if the need arises. Everything I've gone over so far points out a fatal flaw of Tsushima's combat, a lack of variety in options and foes. That being said, there is one element of combat that I've been ignoring so far, that being the various sword stances Jin can obtain. These act like a game of rock, paper, scissors where one is more effective against a certain type of enemy through inflicting more stagger. For instance, stone stance messes up sword type foes, wind stance ruins spear guys, shield users can't stand water stance. The main appeal of these stances are they introduce yet another variable into the juggling act. One other thing the player has to think about while in the heat of the moment. Although these stances are pretty lackluster overall, the player only ever uses them for their stagger advantage and nothing else. All 4 stances have their own movesets, and even a unique ability. These typically vary through range, damage, animation speed, and some other elements. When using the different sword stances, none of this matters. All the player cares about is the Pokemon-esque water beats fire kind of game. You're never considering the fact that water stance is much faster than the others, or that wind stance has a massive wind-up animation to its slices. Instead, all that matters is which one is effective against the soldiers I'm currently targeting. I did mention that each form has its own unique ability, but these often feel gimmicky and slow rather than useful in a fight. Remember, Tsushima has a big focus on speed. Many of these unique attacks are slow and therefore not worth using or even considering during most situations, meaning the only thing that would incentivize the player to use the different stances besides their stagger advantage isn't really worth using anyway. I think I may have come across more negatively than I wanted to about combat. Despite all these criticisms, I never really found myself getting tired of the bread and butter encounters. I believe the reason for this is because of the randomness behind the juggling act, and the solid foundation behind the block dodge parry rhythm. No 2 encounters are ever going to be exactly the same, meaning at least to some degree there's an element of uniqueness. Combine this with seamlessly bobbing and weaving between enemy strikes, and there's a recipe for success here. Honestly, I do like the combat in Tsushima. It's pretty good. The thing that's holding it back is the lack of effort put into everything outside the core foundation. Sword stances don't supply what should feel like an entirely different weapon because there's no incentive to use them in that way. Ghost weapons are a huge letdown because most of them just serve one purpose, and one of them is way better at accomplishing that goal than any other. The complete lack of enemy variety is probably the biggest sin. If this problem didn't exist, combat would always be fun and fresh, even if the ghost weapons and sword stances are stale, simply because the player would have to adapt to the new foe being placed in front of them and learn how to overcome them. The other side of the coin that is Tsushima's combat is stealth. The best way I can describe this element of gameplay is as a question, where the answer is, if I'm feeling it. What I'm getting at here is for most content, stealth is only an option, not the solution. For every single Mongol camp you visit, you can either choose to run in and kill everyone, i.e. what I just went over, or methodically pick off the adversaries inside. To me, the stealth feels less like the other half of gameplay, and more like the younger child that plays second fiddle to their older sibling. If I say that in more layman terms, the mechanic exists to serve as a way to spice up gameplay so you aren't just fighting the same pack of enemies every time. I feel this way mainly because stealth is extremely underdeveloped. It works in the way you would expect. Jin gets into a crouching position and slowly makes his way towards a foe. If he gets spotted, an awareness bar slowly builds up, indicating to the player that they have been spotted. This is pretty much Stealth 101 for many games. So what does this have to do with the mechanic being underdeveloped? Well, for the most part, this is really all you do in any stealth encounter. Waltz up to a foe, assassinate them, and repeat about 20 times. There are only two other gameplay features that have anything to do with it, that being the bow, and the final ghost weapon, the wind chime. The bow eliminates much of the difficulty of stealth, that being having to figure out a path to maneuver so you can take out an enemy without being seen. This typically requires surveying the area for potential hiding spots and memorizing enemy pathing. Since the bow allows you to attack from a range, a great deal of this struggle is eliminated. The majority of soldiers can be simply one-shotted by a headshot, so it's as if you're assassinating them anyway. In order to combat this, the game does introduce helmets that stop the player from being able to do this. However, the longbow, which is an additional bow that can be found in Act 1, allows you to completely forego this obstacle. Since this is the case, the only real difference the helmets make is stopping Jin from picking off every enemy in the area because he can carry less arrows for the longbow than the short bow. I will admit these two weapons don't completely eliminate the need to sneak around or develop a plan of attack, just that the range they offer provides far more options, making it a little too easy to defeat a camp. The wind chime is the only tool at your disposal to make stealth a little unique. It essentially acts as a beacon so Jin can pull a Mongol off their designated path. This can be used in multiple ways. Perhaps you want to isolate a guard and pick him off, while throw down a chime and get busy. Maybe you want to move a target to another location in order to pick someone else off. Sure, that's an option. This certainly isn't anything groundbreaking, and is an aspect of stealth that is typically given to the player in any game that uses the mechanic. The wind chime doesn't do anything differently than any other version of itself from any other game, so there isn't much else to say. It provides the player a method to manipulate the encounters in order to make picking off foes easier, not much else. With these two things out of the way, Ghost of Tsushima doesn't introduce anything else for its entire length. You get both bows and most likely the wind chime during Act 1, so for all of Act 2 and 3 there's literally nothing else. I suppose you get the ability to kill an enemy from behind a door once you rescue Big S, but I wouldn't say it's anything special. There's also the poison blow dart, but this acts in the exact same way as the bow, only it's even more effective, allowing Jin to instantly kill any Mongol. There is another factor to stealth encounters that I haven't gone over yet, the levels themselves. It's not just the paths enemies take that matters, but how a level is laid out. What can you use to conceal yourself? How is this cover positioned relative to the patrolling men? Maybe there's a wasp nest Jin can shoot in order to pick off a few soldiers. The point is the player has to be observant and really think about what their best action is. Sadly, Tsushima doesn't handle the level design of its areas all that well either, mainly because the game employs a template design to them. What this means is many of the camps feel like cookie-cutter copies of each other with a few differences sprinkled in. You'll be hiding in the same huts, picking off archers from towers, and hiding in tall grass in just about every area you travel to. You're repeating the same exact tactics in every location you visit, so it just starts to get dull. Factor in the lack of variety in gameplay features and this starts to become a glaring hole for the game. Something I haven't gone over that I really don't like about stealth are the consequences for getting caught, or really the lack of any. The larger enemy encampments host a significant amount of soldiers and are much bigger in scale. One would think getting caught would be a big problem because every enemy would be aware of their presence. Well, this isn't the case. Instead, these fortresses are cut off into zones for the foes inside. Essentially, if you get caught, only the Mongols in that zone will notice you. Everyone else will just walk around casually as their friends howl in pain. Not only is this unrealistic, but it gets rid of any reason to care about the stealth aspect. You don't need to carefully plan out how you're going to methodically kill every single soldier. Instead, you can pick off a few guys in a zone and then just jump out. These large camps should be challenging the player's stealth capabilities. If they get caught, every single soldier should be alerted, and now they have to either run away or attempt to fight the enemy assault. This should be insanely difficult, nudging the player in the direction of, hey, maybe you should actually do that whole sneaking around thing. This gives some much needed weight to these encounters and provides a more unique gameplay experience. The tinier camps can't provide this because they lack even more depth in their design. They're just too small to give stealth the complex level layout needed to really bring out the mechanic. The big encampments do allow for this, except the game is too afraid to not allow the player to run in samurai style. This is what I meant by it playing second fiddle to standard combat. It feels like Sucker Punch weren't confident enough in their stealth gameplay, or they just really wanted you to do traditional combat all the time, so they made it more of an option to supplement the core combat experience. If you're getting tired of the standard method, how about giving stealth a try? Shifting between the two helps eliminate the feeling that gameplay is ridiculously repetitive and lacks real depth. Even in terms of the narrative, I think this choice was a bad one. Tsushima is constantly communicating that the samurai way doesn't work, that Jin needs to adapt, except you can still play like a samurai even when that should be impossible. I understand the Ghost vs Samurai plot point is meant to be integrated into gameplay, and that's fine, but at the end of the day, the message is the ghost will be what drives the Mongols away. We spent all of Act 1 gathering allies to storm a castle because running in is suicide, yet a large Mongol fortress is no problem at all? It just doesn't make any sense. I believe I've just about covered everything on this topic, so it's time to transition. My next focus is going to be on the majority of side content the game has to offer. A lot of things fall underneath this umbrella. Hot Springs, Bamboo Strikes, Haiku, Pillars of Honor, you get the idea. A lot of these focus on progression. Hot Springs give more health, Bamboo Strikes offer resolve in order to heal, Fox Dens provide more charm slots, and Mongol camps give resources to enhance gear. That's all well and good for the first act because these benefits feel noteworthy. The problem is once you reach the latter portion of the game, Tsushima's progression falls off a cliff. Increasing your tail can also lead to more health or another point of resolve. In the beginning, you'll be getting tail level ups frequently, meaning more ghost weapons, health, and resolve. Tsushima makes exploration integral to its design, so I doubt the player won't be finding a few of each kind of side objective during Act 1. However, come Act 2, these benefits can feel minuscule in the case of Hot Springs, requiring 5 of them just to see any increase, Bamboo Strikes, or have both problems, Fox Dens. It certainly doesn't help that all of these aren't particularly enjoyable to partake in. Fox Dens are just chasing after a fox until you reach an Inari shrine. Not exactly something I was jumping in joy to do again. Pillars of Honor just give you access to a new sword skin, which is pretty underwhelming. Haiku, while visually beautiful, are repetitive and again only supply you with a vanity item. Focusing on progression again, Mongol encampments give you upgrade materials for your sword, armor, and bows. Following the theme, Act 1 has this working well, but they yet again begin to fall off. The upgrades start to feel less impactful, especially in regards to the bow, and it requires so many supplies just to enhance something once that collecting these resources almost begins to feel pointless. Now, Mongol camps have their own gameplay appeal that I've already gone over, however many of the other side tasks do not. They rely solely on the benefit they provide, and when that stops being appealing, the question marks found in between objectives you're trying to reach feel more like a chore rather than a small little bonus. Gradually you start to pass them up and the game begins to feel hollow because there isn't much else to do. The final nail in the coffin for me is that only one new side objective is ever introduced after Act 1, that being the Straw Hat Duels. These are basically just the boss battles I already went over previously, which means that yet again they're highly repetitive, although still entertaining to engage in. I believe there are two main exceptions to what I've outlined above, that being Shinto shrines and Mythic Tales. I'll acknowledge that yet again many of the shrines have the same template feel I've complained about earlier, but I think Tsushima does a much better job hiding this. Jin isn't climbing around that often, and there aren't that many shrines to begin with, so the experience feels unique based on a lack of overexposure. It certainly helps that the way the levels are designed lead to stunning views and exposes the player to different kinds of terrain, briefly giving Tsushima a very light platforming element to it. The other is the Mythic Tales, well, some of them at least. What you do is listen to a musician tell some tale about a mythical old Japanese weapon or piece of armor and then go searching for it based on the story. The first few are pretty well done, even if they all reuse the same gimmick. The Legend of Tadayori, the Heavenly Strike, and the Curse of Uchisune, which is a curse to say in recording by the way, all have the same kind of flower motif that is used as a guide to complete the quest. Alright, technically the Heavenly Strike uses white tree leaves, but flower petals, leaves, what's the difference? So you might be asking yourself, if these quests all use the same mechanics, wouldn't that be a problem based on everything else I've said in this video? Well, my insightful viewer, you raise a good point. The reason I don't really care about this when it comes to these quests is because they still provide their own unique experience regardless of the shared mechanics. The individual story associated with the mythical equipment you're searching for and the combat encounters all feel distinct. Heavenly Strike has you chasing after a psychopathic murderer obsessed with a legendary sword technique. You spend the entire quest chasing him down, and everything culminates with an epic duel between him and Jin. Tadayori was one of the best archers known to Japan, whose armor was blessed by the gods. He was known for his great feats in protecting the island from pirates, and now it's your turn to continue on his legacy as Tsushima's protector. What I'm getting at here is the narrative is strong enough to carry these quests on their own, so I don't care about a few copy and paste mechanics. The same cannot be said for some of the later ones, such as Unbreakable Gosaku and the Six Blades of Kojiro. Both of these appear during Act 2 and really help personify the argument that the game begins to nosedive around this point. Both of them have the exact same problem. You're running back and forth doing the same cookie cutter encounter for the entire quest. To unlock the area where Gosaku's armor is being held, you need to collect 6 keys from farms found around Tsushima. So basically you travel to a farm, perform the same clear the level of enemies you've done in just about every side objective, and then have a filler conversation with the head of the farm. Repeat that 6 times and boom, you got the armor. There is a story about Gosaku being an ordinary farmer who donned a samurai's armor in order to defend his farm from bandits, but it just feels like an afterthought. The story isn't interesting, nor is it contributing anything to make this fetch quest feel any special. The Six Blades of Kojiro has you fighting 5 Straw Hat mercenaries in one-on-one duels before fighting the menacing killer Kojiro himself. Do I really need to go over the faults of this quest design? It's the same as Gosaku, only at least the duels are far more entertaining than clearing farmsteads. Although the movesets for these mercenaries are mostly the same with only a few different tactics sprinkled in, so it does begin to feel like the same fight over and over again. Once you defeat all 5 of them, Kojiro permits you to challenge him. Jin wins the duel and takes the guy's armor as his spoils. While on the topic of quests, let's focus more on generic ones featured in Tsushima. Generally, these tasks embody the term filler. Almost every single one of them can be described in some combination of these 3 actions: fighting some Mongols, following some tracks, and sneaking around. The most complex these missions will ever get is some utilizing all 3 of these. For instance, in the Value of Sake, all the player does is defend the business from a few waves of Mongols. There is no building of a connection with the brewery, or any reason to care about it at all. You'll never return or see these people ever again, so the whole thing kinda feels pointless. Another quest has the player investigating an area to check on a man's family. All you do is look around the house, and eventually find the corpses of his loved ones. While this certainly is regrettable, everyone involved are just a bunch of filler NPCs that have no impact or continuity. Not every single side quest is as bad as I'm making them out to be. The other side of honor has Jin chasing down a peasant who is cozying up to the village's women by pretending to be a samurai. While this quest doesn't break away from the 3 core elements, it's at the very least entertaining to partake in, although my standards aren't exactly very high at this point. More often than not, the writing for these tasks is on the level of the Value of Sake. I think naming the majority of the quest givers simply peasant perfectly personifies just how invested the player will be in these tasks. The stories almost always revolve around some kind of hardship created through the invasion. While this is realistic, it makes many of them feel the same. The Mongols are causing some trouble, and I need your help. Due to a lack of law enforcement, bandits did something bad to me, and I need your help. The war has made it dangerous to go out, and I'm running low on supplies. Since the vast majority of these tasks are mechanically dull, lack characters to care about, and have weak stories, there's very little reason to say anything positive about them. So what is this talk about armor? You've probably seen Jin wearing a variety of gear at this point, and no, it's not just for the sake of appearances. These outfits provide Jin with different modifiers that help support a particular playstyle. Tadayori was an archer, so his gear enhances the bow. Big bulky samurai armor usually gives you more health, and sometimes increases the stagger caused by heavy attacks or pure damage in general. This is meant to assist with combat, which makes sense considering the whole samurai code relies on them battling the foe head-on. Jin eventually gets ghost armor, which helps with his ability to use the 5 trinkets at his disposal as well as reduce enemy detection speed. The bonuses being tied to the armor thematically is applied to every piece of gear you can equip and always makes sense. I think the only real flaw here has less to do with the armor itself and more to do with the lack of variation in gameplay. There are 2 primary ways to play the game: sneak around or fight head-on. What this means is the armor sets themselves are bound to this. Since they can only enhance 2 playstyles, there isn't a whole lot of wiggle room for what each set can enhance. This leads to a lot of finding a new set of gear and then never putting on the old one. Now this is fine if used correctly. Having a pure upgrade can help with giving the player a sense of progression, but it shouldn't be done so often that it feels like you're only ever wearing a fraction of the options available. Then there is Tadayori's armor, which enhances a mechanic that isn't developed enough to really warrant any use. The Kensei armor has a similar issue where its bonuses enhance your ghost weapon's damage, but these are primarily used for crowd control rather than damage, so the effects feel lackluster. To sum up my thoughts, I do like armor in concept, but in practice the limitations of the game's own mechanics tend to hamper its potential. If gameplay was perhaps a little more complex, I don't think I would have any real problems. So let's tie this 20-minute discussion about Tsushima's gameplay with a nice little bow. You've probably noticed that I've been having a bit of a variety problem of my own. I keep repeating the exact same criticisms for just about every element of gameplay, and I think we're both getting a little tired of it. I mentioned a little earlier that this action-adventure open-world style genre tends to have this problem. That's because it has to deal with the struggle of any open-world game, filling its world with content for the player to partake in. Sadly, the easiest way to achieve this is to create a template for a type of encounter or objective and then copying it en masse with some minor discrepancies. This strategy is utilized so frequently because making original content takes up time and money. You need people to write characters, create a narrative, make the gameplay engaging, ensure it makes sense within the context of the world. There's so much that goes into just one piece of content. Having to do this for everything the player can do in a game is exhausting and extremely inefficient. Video games are an industry designed around making a profit, much like any industry really, not the best product of all time. With this in mind, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that Tsushima has this flaw. What does bother me is the idea that this game is a masterpiece. A game doesn't have to be groundbreaking to be good, but a masterpiece needs to be able to look at the flaws of its predecessors and meet that challenge head on. Tsushima doesn't accomplish this where it counts. The game does a phenomenal job at making exploration feel natural, is constantly supplying content for the player to complete, and is stunningly beautiful. However, it flubs the most important element, what you'll actually be doing inside the world. The biggest issue is, this content just stops feeling rewarding after the first act, because all you're doing are the things you've already done 30 times. Fox dens, Mongol camps, haiku, bamboo strikes, hot springs, all of these are things you do during Act 1, and yet again they're what predominantly you'll be doing during Act 2 and 3. The only new type of mission added during Act 2 are the Straw Hat Duels for the Kojiro quest. I don't know how anyone can view this as acceptable, especially since none of these things are even really all that fun. I stopped enjoying chasing after the fox after the 3rd time. The haiku scenery is pretty, but it certainly isn't stimulating in any way. All you do during the hot springs is just stare at Jin's butt as he contemplates something for 2 seconds. This bleeds into gameplay as well. There are only 5 ghost weapons and odds are you'll have obtained them all before the end of Act 1. All you get during Act 2 is the blow dart and the ghost stance. This applies for sword stances as well, which already have their own issues. The first act is only around 40% of the game. This means practically nothing new is introduced for 60% of the experience. Yet this is what a masterpiece looks like? This was one of the best games of 2020? Maybe I'm crazy or I'm missing something, but I just don't get it. The first time I played Ghost of Tsushima, I didn't even finish it. I got to the 3rd act, and I just didn't care anymore. The main narrative and themes were fine, but they weren't good enough to supplement how frustrated I was with the complete and utter lack of new mechanics. When the player sees something new to do on the map in an open world game and they find themselves groaning instead of being excited, you know there's a problem. I decided to give Tsushima a second shot and I found myself feeling the exact same way. There isn't anything that this game does to answer the problem that plagues its genre. In fact, it's so safe that there's barely any attempt at all. Assassin's Creed gets flack for this all the time, but when Tsushima repeats the exact same mistakes, no one bats an eye. Alright, I've gone over every piece of gameplay I thought was significant enough to be worth mentioning, and had my big moment where I lambasted the game. I believe it's time to finally move on to this fabled Act 2 I keep mentioning. So the game's story progresses in a similar way as Act 1. Instead of recruiting individual allies, Jin has 3 other objectives he has to complete before helping his uncle retake his castle. I know we're fresh off the "where on earth is the variety in this game" rant, but I feel compelled to point out that the structure of Act 1 is being copy and pasted for Act 2. We have to recruit the people of Yarikawa, obtain Jin's family armor, and contact the shogun for reinforcements. Then it all concludes with Jin and his newfound compatriots storming yet another castle. I'm just gonna drop that piece of knowledge and let you mull over it. I think we all know what I would say. So let's start off with recruiting the good people of Yarikawa. Jin arrives at the village to find it under siege by the Mongols. Yunna and Taka just so happen to grow up here and they know a secret way in. So you sneak in through the siege camp and find your way into the village. The people of Yarikawa feel similarly about Shimura as I do, so they refuse to assist him in the fight against the invaders. The reason for this is, Clan Yarikawa rebelled against Big Pop S around 20 years ago and had all the samurai slaughtered when they failed. Clearly there's some leftover animosity between Shims and the Kawas. Jin, not taking no for an answer, learns from Taka that the town's best archers went off to fight the Mongols against the leader's orders. With this knowledge, Jin decides to put his money where his mouth is by assisting them in their quest. You help the archers rescue some of their captured men, and they agree to put in a good word for you. Returning back to the village, the Mongols conveniently announce their plan to assault Yarikawa. Since a slaughtered village doesn't exactly align well with the ghost's plan to retake Castle Shimura, Jin agrees to help defend against the attack. What follows after this is one of the best segments of the entire game. It begins with a fun evening of drinks between Jin and Yunna. Initially, the two warriors are all laughs, sharing humorous stories about their pasts. However, things take a serious turn when Yunna brings up her mother. This is clearly meant to be a topic of contention for her. Yunna's mother wasn't exactly winning any Parent of the Year awards. She was a neglectful drunk who relied on her children to maintain her drinking problem. Once she broke Taka's arm, Yunna knew the siblings had to leave town, regardless of how intimidating this choice was. I found this conversation hits all the right beats. It demonstrates the relationship between Jin and Yunna has grown to the point that they trust one another with deep personal information. Jin even sees himself in Yunna's story, lamenting that sometimes people have no choice but to turn their backs on everything they know in the pursuit of their goals. Of course, Jin is talking about how he had to abandon the samurai code in order to protect the people of Tsushima. This conversation with Yunna represents a turning point for Jin. In the beginning of Tsushima, the two of them are strangers. The ghost looks down on her for being a thief and is completely unwilling to embrace her tactics. Instead, we have a huge supply of cutscenes with Shimura that is meant to reinforce Jin's way of thinking. In contrast to this, now we have the samurai having a mutual understanding with his thief companion that he bickered with so much initially. The distance between the two of them has lessened considerably. Jin's new path is completely alien to Shimura, which has caused a rift between them that neither of the two lords are fully aware of yet. Subconsciously, Jin finds companionship and understanding through the one person he feels can relate to his choices and struggles. The rift between uncle and nephew will only grow as the act continues, and this scene does a fantastic job pushing the narrative forward. That's enough talk about feelings and relationships. Where's the good old-fashioned male values of letting our swords do the talking? There's a whole siege and we're wasting time on this mushy garbage. I gotta get my testosterone pumping. Alright, I'll cover the siege. The conversation with Yunna isn't the only great element of this segment. The Mongol Assault is an exciting battle that not only achieves the goal of being an entertaining gameplay segment, but also advances the narrative. The people of Yarikawa see Jin as this unstoppable force, and to be fair, they aren't too far off the mark. They look to him for guidance and find their own resolve through his example. The legendary Ghost of Tsushima, the figure responsible for freeing Shimura and being a constant thorn in the Mongol side, is fighting. If he's on their side giving it his all, then they have to at least try, even if the odds are stacked against them. From a gameplay perspective, all this excitement and build-up makes the battle feel exciting. All you're really doing is fighting the same group of Mongols you faced 1,000 times, but the circumstances just provide a weight behind every defeated foe. I wanted to defend this village from the Mongols at all costs. The legend of the ghost really comes into its own here. Before, it felt more like some half-baked image that Yunna came up with on a whim. After this siege, it starts to feel mythical. The fighting reaches its climax when Jin faces off against the Mongol general in charge of the assault. An enjoyable boss battle ensues, which concludes with Jin giving into his impulses and mercilessly decapitating the general where he stands. This display of force leaves the poor guy's subordinates fearing for their lives. The Mongols have always been the dominators who use violence as a way to subjugate people. Now Jin has turned their best weapon against them, and it turns out to be pretty effective. With this newfound momentum, the people of Yarikawa rally back and send the invading Mongol force running for the hills. Honestly, it's difficult to put the emotion invoked by the sequence into words. There's this overwhelming sense of invincibility as Jin slaughters the Mongol general. You can really feel the fear radiating from the enemy soldiers. I think the best way to describe it is almost like a lion pouncing on its prey, completely dominating and bending the weaker life form to its will. Jin is the predator here, and the Mongols are merely his playthings. All of this translates so effectively to gameplay as the ghost stance is finally introduced, allowing you to instantly eviscerate any enemies unlucky enough to be standing in your path. The thrill of the chase as I hunted down every last Mongol and gutted them like the insignificant worms that they are sent a shiver up my spine. Oh, was I recording? that was just a joke. I was just really articulating what a predator would feel like. I would never derive any joy from hurting others. I swear. Anyway, if you haven't already figured out, just about everything to do with this quest is great. The raw sense of power that the player feels, the growth of the ghost legend, Jin and Yunna's relationship, everything just clicks together perfectly. See, I can be positive. With Yarikawa recruited, we have 2 more pit stops before taking on Castle Shimura. The first task is claiming Jin's family armor, and the second being finding a way to contact the Shogun for reinforcements. Obviously, one of these is more important than the other, which is why we're going to transition to the Sakai family armor. What? Clearly a sense of armor is far more valuable than an army of reinforcements. I mean, when it's Jin wearing it, is this statement even an exaggeration? In comparison to fighting an enemy siege in order to recruit new allies, grabbing some armor may seem a little mundane. Well, that certainly is correct, as this quest is nothing compared to Yarikawa, but that doesn't make it bad. In fact, Tsushima sheds its violent streak for a bit of emotional payoff. Much like with Jin, traveling to the Sakai estate invokes a sense of nostalgia. Well, at least it did for me. I don't know about you. That's odd to say about a location I've never visited before, but the statement still holds true. The opening chamber is the same one the player sees in Jin's flashback sequence during his father's funeral. Combine this with the circular training grounds that act as a tutorial, and I think the nostalgia is justified. This coincides with the emotions that Jin is feeling as well. There's happiness at finally returning home after a long absence, however there's also some degree of pain. He may have lived here his whole life, but this is where he failed to save his father. The armor he died in, dead center in the room, serving as a constant reminder. The wound from his emotional trauma still hasn't healed even though the boy is a grown man now. With this knowledge, it shouldn't come as a surprise that the ghost's first order of business is to pay his respects to his father. This is one of the few times I actually enjoyed writing a haiku because the scenery and weight behind the words actually meant something. Sadly, this can't be said for about 95% of them. Once this task is completed, Jin finally puts the demons of his past to rest. The scene is short, but a lot of emotion is conveyed. Every action is deliberate. The slow, methodical advance towards the armor showcasing hesitation and a sense of unease. The look of discomfort plastered across our hero's face as he stares down the embodiment of his biggest failure. As Jin dons the face mask of his father, there is no joy, no excitement, just pain. Pain at feeling that he is unworthy, that a disgrace like himself has no claim to something so valuable, so important. Jin has already sacrificed so much to stand right here, to even be given the chance to have this moment. He stabbed men in the back, ruthlessly pierced them with arrows, and blown them to pieces. He's already turned his back on his code, no, his life, for the people of Tsushima. However, it hasn't been enough. And in order to overcome the unstoppable force that is the Mongol Empire, he's going to have to give up everything. This includes his own trauma. The excuse, "I couldn't do it because I'm not worthy," just sounds pathetic to the people who have lost their homes, families, and entire way of life. It's simply not justifiable, and our hero knows that. I don't think Jin is actually coming to terms with the death of his father here. Look at that expression. That's a man who would rather be doing anything else. I believe it's pure determination to save the people of Tsushima at any cost. Any advantage he can gain, no matter how minuscule, is worth it. The final stare is one of acceptance, although what's being accepted is a responsibility, not the death of a loved one. Alright, so we got a little serious there, but I've spent enough time overanalyzing a minute-long cutscene. Something I've been looking over is Yuriko, Jin's caretaker. Her role here isn't that important, but she does provide the inspiration in order to make the blow dart that the ghost uses to poison people. The rest of the quest has Jin gathering some reeds to make the device, and then testing out his new weapon on the Mongols. With the armor claimed and the blow dart crafted, I can finally turn my attention towards contacting the Shogun for reinforcements. This is probably the worst of the 3 tasks that need to be completed, but since the other 2 have been relatively high quality, that isn't really a bad thing. Jin contacts a smuggler who owes Shimura a debt, and he agrees to sneak his way through the Mongols' line in order to deliver a message to the Shogun. In order for him to pull this off, the samurai duo storm a Mongol fort to serve as a distraction. While this gameplay section lacks the setup that made the assault on Yarikawa feel so impactful, it still does a fine enough job. Fighting through the fort alongside Shimi has this frantic feel to it. You never have a moment to take a breather, and the Mongols are constantly trying to stop you. There's also the novelty of being able to fight alongside the uncle. While the AI for your allies is pretty poor, the lines of dialogue and relationship between the 2 family members is what really matters here. Eventually you make your way to a huacha. Remember the thing I complained about with Masako? Yeah, well, this time you're the one manning it. Shimura is hesitant to actually let Jin use the weapon because it's something utilized by the enemy, but faced with the do-or-die situation, he relents. The huacha segment isn't meant to be a challenge or mechanically complex. It's a pure power trip as the player casually obliterates the Mongols' entire fleet parked on the shore. The logistics behind this one tool being so effective it can decimate this many ships makes little sense in terms of continuity, but I've got plenty of other things to be a pedantic prick about, so I'm gonna let this slide. What I'm not willing to let go is that throughout the storming of the fort, Shimura never calls out Jin for using his ghost weapons or straying from the samurai path. If you throw a couple of kunai at the enemy, Shimi doesn't bat an eye. In fact, he spends the entire combat section complimenting his nephew on how excellent of a warrior he has become. I thought there would have been some attention to detail here, as this is one of the game's main plot points, but sadly nothing was included. This sequence also further contributes to my criticism that Jin is a one-man army that doesn't really need the help of others, or at least not in a significant way. You're telling me that 2 samurai can just waltz into a fort and slaughter everyone inside? How strong does Ghost of Tsushima think a samurai is? Did I miss the part where adhering to the warrior code invokes the will of some war god? I mean, this just isn't grounded in reality. I know what you're thinking. Angle, your pedantic prick side is showing. Who cares if none of this makes logical sense? I'm having a blast being drunk on my own power trip. Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and would probably agree with you if it wasn't for one point. Tsushima is constantly insisting that Jin would not be here without the help of others, but when you have gameplay sections like this, it just becomes hard to believe that. The evidence for this just keeps piling up. Taking on all of Azamo Bay, doing all the legwork in Castle Kaneda, and don't worry, there's more to come. If the game didn't keep trying to spin this point, I would be willing to suspend my disbelief and just say, whatever. The completion of samurai training comes with a free Captain America Super Soldier injection, but this just isn't the case. Trying to bring some more positivity to this segment, the tug-of-war between Yunna and Shimura is expanded upon. Throughout the entire quest, it feels like Big S is trying to reaffirm the samurai way to Jin, telling him that they can only maintain the element of surprise until they see the enemy, that they have to fight head-on with honor and glory. He focuses on complimenting his nephew's form and how he has grown into an exceptional warrior. Everything is fine, the floor is definitely not lava, and Jin most certainly has not strayed from the samurai path. The final gut punch is Shimura's big announcement at the end. He wants to officially adopt Jin as his son in order to make him his heir. While I definitely believe that Shimura's desire for this is genuine, it also happens to be a great tool to manipulate the ghost into behaving himself. As long as Jin doesn't do anything drastic, the 2 of them can claim the glory of defeating the Mongols as father and son. Hoo boy, what could possibly go wrong? So with the retake Castle Shimura to-do list all checked off, we finally have a castle to siege. Psych! Shims has intercepted orders from the Khan instructing Ryuzo to attack the enemy's army flank during the assault on the fort. So it's up to the only guy who accomplishes anything around here to yet again do everything. To be fair, the world's best uncle does offer to help, but the ghost turns him down. However, he does ask Yunna for assistance one last time. She turns him down, saying this isn't her fight anymore. She's fulfilled her end of the bargain, and now just wants to sail to the mainland in order to start a new life with Taka. Notice how Jin rejects his uncle's help here, but immediately goes straight for Yunna. It's subtle, but you can already see who our hero has grown to rely on more. Despite Yunna rejecting Jin's offer, he still has to settle things with Ryuzo, so he ventures forward alone. except right when the samurai is about to strike, Taka shows up to offer his aid. The ghost is a little apprehensive about this, but eventually relents. Taka serves as an excellent distraction, and Jin enters the camp with a sizable portion of the Mongols chasing after Taka. The player murders their way through, and is eventually confronted by Ryuzo. After a brief conversation, Jin gets taken out in an absolutely pathetic way. This is a guy who has killed all the invaders occupying an entire town, has massacred fully operational military camps, was the main driving force behind the victory at Yarikawa, and all it takes to knock him out is this little backslap? For someone who feels like an unbeatable force of nature, this just felt incredibly underwhelming. The events that end up getting the ghost captured may feel a little unrealistic given the game's own standards, but what happens after is incredibly well done. Our hero wakes up to find himself and Taka bound to a pole. As they both struggle to get free, they're confronted by the last person I think either of them expected to see, Khotun Khan. This guy brings to life every scene he's in, and he doesn't fail here either. He attempts to drive a wedge between nephew and uncle using every strategy in the book. Appealing to ambition, jealousy, Jin's desire to save lives, the Khan has no shame. Of course, none of this actually phases the ghost. He frees Taka and tells Yunna's brother that if he kills the samurai, he can go free. In a show of resolve, Taka lunges towards the warlord, but his attack is sloppy and easily sidestepped. Enraged, the Khan crushes him beneath his boot and rips his head clean off right in front of Jin. Yeah, this scene isn't for the faint of heart. The moment itself is pretty impactful, but the real boon of Taka's death are the after effects. This was already a personal mission for Jin, but having your friend's head ripped off right in front of you by a man who only saw their life as something to be manipulated for their own gain is maddening. No one would be thinking entirely rationally for a decent period of time. Imagine how Yunna's going to feel. Oh, hey Yunna, how's that whole getting off the island thing coming along? Fending off the people invading his home has become our hero's purpose in life. He's dedicated and sacrificed everything to accomplish this goal. To Yunna, Taka represents the same thing. She has spent her life pursuing a better life for the two of them. All the stealing, threats, people she's killed, everything is for this dream. I can't imagine having the thing you've worked your entire life trying to achieve slip right through your fingers when you're finally about to grasp it. The death of Taka represents a turning point for these two. Yunna makes defeating the Mongols her one goal, and Jin, having experienced such a traumatic event, is plunged deeper into the ghost mentality. Savages like these don't deserve honor. All they understand is dominance and death. So with newfound motivation, the duo prepare to assault Castle Shimura alongside Yarikawa, the shogunate reinforcements, and capital LS himself. One thing that never really made any sense to me was how the shogun even got reinforcements on the island considering the Mongols must be blockading it with their ships. If he was capable of this, why didn't he send in help sooner? Why wasn't there any help during the initial battle at Komura? Doesn't a lord have a duty to protect his people? Well, it turns out when another lord comes begging for help, then all of a sudden it becomes your duty to protect your subjects. Regardless of how I feel about the continuity behind them, the samurai reinforcements are here, and it's time for the assault to begin. The gameplay portion of this feels relatively the same to when Jin and Shimura attack the fort together. The battles are quick and frantic, providing a sense of urgency. You even get on a Hwacha again and clear out the majority of enemies for your advancing army. One thing that I definitely don't like is how the player feels like they're the only ones doing anything. We have Sensei Ishikawa, Lady Masako, Yunna, Shims, and an entire army, yet the only one accomplishing something is you. Look at the amount of havoc you cause the Mongols. There's even a section where Shimura demands that you alone go on and defeat the invaders so that the army can advance. I just can't buy into this false narrative of us needing allies when we're this good at getting results on our own. Returning back to the actual events, everything culminates with the bridge leading to the main area of the fort being blown up by the Mongols. Shimura loses a sizable portion of his men, and the leader decides to honor their sacrifice by forcing the remaining men to rebuild the bridge and try another direct assault at dawn. I think any random soldier who has only dabbled in military tactics can see that this is a bad idea. Jin agrees with this sentiment, and in an emotional confrontation with his uncle, calls him out for throwing away the lives of the people they're supposed to be protecting. This discussion is the final nail in the coffin for the family members. The game has been slowly driving Jin towards new extremes. Komura Beach, Ryuzo's betrayal, the traumatic death of Taka. The guy has experienced a fair amount of hardship over a relatively short period of time. If you add on that there's little to no time to cope with these issues since he's too busy being the only guy on the island achieving results, and I think Jin is reasonably emotionally distressed. The ghost is constantly saying that he's sacrificing everything for his people, and honestly those lines didn't have much of an effect on me at first, but thinking back on it, there's so much weight behind them. Jin truly has sacrificed almost everything, while Shimura refuses to adjust his strategies at all. After the devastating loss at Komoda Beach, and being captured yourself, how could you not question your methods at all? He relies on the ghost for literally everything because he knows Jin will achieve results. Maybe it's time you started taking advice from the guy who has spent all this time fighting the Mongols while you were locked away. To put it bluntly, this scene was a long time coming, and it feels good to hear the hero stick it to his uncle. After this argument, the ghost decides that if Shimi won't do anything to spare their soldiers' lives, then he will. Using his allies to gather as much poison as possible, he sneaks into the Mongol camp via grappling hook and poisons the drinks they're enjoying. After this act, a whole train wreck of events comes forward. Buckle down, ladies and gents, because a lot of plot points are coming to a head, and I have a lot to say. So immediately after laying waste to the remaining garrison, the ex-samurai makes his way into the central building. He's hoping for the Khan, but is instead met with his old friend Ryuzo. One tiny detail I glossed over is while escaping from the Mongol camp Taka died in, you end up finishing off the remaining Straw Hats. With that little point out of the way, how about I just show footage instead of explaining what happens?
Made me stay behind to collect the ghost's head. Then come claim it. No. I could have killed you earlier. Instead, I convinced the Khan to give you a chance. He murdered Taka. And you slaughtered my men. I've lost everything. Except you. We can defeat the Mongols together. After everything you've done! Tell the people I was your spy. Sent to gain the Khan's trust. They'll believe the ghost. Stop! You are my oldest friend, Ryuzo. Surrender. And answer for your crimes. For both our sakes. I can't.
I haven't spoken too much about Ryuzo, but since this is his last scene, spoiler alert, he doesn't make it, I think it's an appropriate time. From the beginning, I never once liked Ryuzo. When I say that, I don't mean personally, although that statement still holds true. I mean as a character, he's poorly written. In Act 1, I went over why I thought his reasoning for even joining the Khan in the first place was just illogical. In case you forgot, here's a brief bullet point list as to why. Having that established really damages the whole childhood friend betrays you angle. However, listening to Ryuzo's arguments in the previous scene just make him come across as pathetic. The Khan no longer has any use for him, and the traitor knows it. Now that he's suddenly at the mercy of Shimura's army, he wants to cooperate and fight the enemy together. Jin obviously sees right through this and calls the scumbag out, but then the game seems to justify this ridiculous behavior. Ryuzo equivocates Jin slaughtering his men to his betrayal of their country. This is just absurd. Ryuzo chose to side with the Khan. His men chose to follow in his footsteps. If the guy truly didn't have any other options, then I would be more sympathetic, but as my flawless bullet points showcase, this just isn't true. Then he attempts to bypass all responsibility for his actions by asking Jin, the best friend he betrayed, to do him a solid and say he was a spy. Man, I thought I knew what being a terrible person was. This is just kicking it into maximum overdrive. For someone who claims their actions are solely about saving others, he sure cares an awful lot about saving his own skin. In all honesty, I'm not 100% certain what the game is going for with Ryuzo's character. Are we supposed to be sympathetic to this BS and sob story? Is the opposite true and we're meant to just hate him for the scumbag that he is? Either of these options don't really work for me. If they wanted to do the first option, then they really should have made Ryuzo's plight in Act 1 feel like something far more devastating. Without this, the entire foundation is completely destroyed. If the other point is true, then why do they spend so much time attempting to humanize him? His entire motivation is centered around doing what's best for the people under him. I mean, if I compiled a video video of all the times this guy said, "my man," he'd start to sound like Jon Snow. Then you have the scene at Castle Shimura where he emotionally burns a guy alive. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here, but I only see these two options and neither one of them work. At best, his character is inconsistent, and at worst, it's just plain bad. With the tale of Ryuzo coming to a close, I can finally turn my attention towards one of the best scenes in the entire game. That of course being Shimura confronting Jin about poisoning the entire Mongol garrison. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that literally everything that has happened so far has been in service to this one singular moment. Just look at the difference in disposition Jin has from the beginning of the game and the present. The samurai is staring down the man responsible for bringing all this chaos to his home, and he is still able to control himself. Sure, there are some brief moments where Jin loses his cool, but for the most part he embodies what Shimura says the samurai are. Then you look at Ryuzo's final moments, and a completely different image is pictured. This is a man who is angry and without mercy. Someone who has experienced so much consecutive suffering that it has become impossible to contain their mess of emotions. I applaud the game for never once stumbling when building this narrative. This was truly well done. Although there's so much more to this scene than just Jin's gradual transformation into the ghost. Shimura's true colors are brought to the forefront. I haven't exactly been very quiet about how much I don't like Shimura during this video, and I think it's finally time to explain why. To make myself clear, unlike Ryuzo, I only dislike Shims on a personal level. I don't think his character is poorly written at all. In fact, I believe the opposite. In this sequence, you see Shimura desperately trying to get Jin to side with him to not forsake the samurai code, and to instead denounce the ghost in favor of being his son. To instead pin all the blame on Yunna, and have himself walk away scot-free. This decision isn't just about choosing the ghost over the samurai. It's not just about choosing Yunna over his uncle. It's about choosing what it truly means to represent and protect one's people. Shimura and the samurai in general are spouting nonsensical lies. Their entire ideology is built upon this idea that their actions are noble, that they are the standard everyone else should strive towards. They represent the ideal member of society, and because of this, they are fit to rule over the weak. However, these people aren't just weak based on prestige or status, but morally bankrupt as well. The reason samurai need to set an example is because without them, the common peasant will simply marauder their way to success. They need the samurai, or else everything will descend into anarchy. However, this baloney couldn't be farther from the truth. Look at Yunna for example. She is the opposite of everything the samurai stand for. She's a thief who has no qualm stabbing someone in the back in order to get what she wants. Shimura takes one look at her and without a second thought considers her lesser to him. Unlike this lowly thief, he doesn't steal. He treats even his adversaries with respect and always looks them in the eye when he takes their lives. He is the pinnacle of what a human being should strive for, and this peasant scum is unfit to even be in his presence. What Shimura fails to understand is why they are both like this. Yunna was born to an alcoholic mother in the slums of a shunned village. Shimura was born to the family of the Jito. While Shimi had the comfort of a castle to craft his haiku skills, Yunna was busy wondering where her next meal was going to come from. While Shimura was practicing his sword technique, Yunna was trying to scrounge together enough money to placate her mother's alcohol addiction. While Shimura is happily laughing with his favorite nephew, shrouded by a warm and beautiful sunset, Yunna was hearing that her abusive mother died face down in the dirt. People don't choose to steal, kill, or commit other criminal acts because they want to. They do it because the situation they are forced into provides them with no other options. It's really easy to say someone should always do the right thing when you haven't had to struggle for your basic needs your entire life. When everything you could ever want has been served you on a silver platter. How can you judge someone as inferior to you when you have no idea what kind of circumstances they have faced? This judgment creates a cycle that always has the strong on top. The strong deserve their wealth and status because they embody what an upstanding human being is. However, the only reason why they can afford to act this way is because of their status and wealth. While the peasants fight over the meager scraps they are afforded, and those that can't get any slice of the pie are forced into a life of depravity just to barely get by. The elite see this behavior and use it as an excuse to justify their status and hoarding of wealth, creating an endless cycle. Then there's the myth that the samurai care about the people under them. Sure, they're willing to go out and fight in order to protect the peasantry, but why are they really protecting them? Look at how Shimura talks during this scene. The first thing he says to Jin is, "You defied me." He continues with lines like, "Is this how you want to be remembered? And I know she drove you to this." Look at what he's focusing on. It's more about Jin's and his image than anything else. He can't stand that one of his subordinates went against his orders because it makes him look weak, like he can't control his nephew. This is one of the real reasons the samurai choose to die in battle. They are obsessed with how they appear to others, and what's more noble than dying in battle to protect others? Yet again, it's all in service to maintaining the status quo. As long as the samurai maintain the aura of supremacy, they can continue to reap the benefits of their power and prestige. Sadly, the ones left to suffer are the ones who can't defend themselves. How can you recklessly charge into battle with no strategy besides fight honorably when the consequences of you losing are this? If they really cared about protecting others, they'd be willing to do anything for them, and that includes breaking their code. What does honor mean to the people who've had their homes burned to the ground? What does honor mean to the children who will never see their parents again? What does honor mean to the people who have had their freedom stolen from them? Honor can't provide people shelter, it can't feed the starving, and it can't break the chains of the oppressed. But what it can do is serve as a tool to reinforce a hierarchical society. In contrast to all this, Jin truly represents what the samurai stand for. He puts protecting the people of Tsushima above everything else, including himself. I've said it plenty of times, but the amount that this guy has sacrificed in order to further this goal is truly admirable. He breaks his code, kills his best friend, faces the trauma of his past, and finally turns his back on the man who he saw as a father, all for the sake of his people. Heck, he even gets his entire clan discontinued in Act 3. Fighting with honor doesn't even register in comparison to this level of dedication. Shimura sends soldiers to die in a pointless crusade and justifies it by saying they get to die a warrior's death. Jin tells the soldiers to sit back, while he puts his own life in danger so they don't have to. He uses his power to uplift and bring a better tomorrow to those incapable of doing so, while the samurai flaunt how great they all are while turning their noses at the people they're supposed to be protecting. Now, I don't think the game is trying to point out these societal issues I just explained in this scene. It only scratches the surface by making Shimura look like a bit of an entitled jerk when he tells Jin to blame everything on Yunna. I think this is meant to speak more about Shim's personal character rather than the entire system. What I do think it's meant to showcase is the clear difference between what is important to Shimura versus Jin. One believes in protecting others in order to maintain their image, while the other is willing to do anything to ensure the people under his protection have some kind of future. I believe Ghost of Tsushima does an absolutely fantastic job accomplishing this goal. Komona Beach stands as an example from the very beginning of what the consequences of the samurai viewpoint lead to. From there, Jin continues to adhere to this ideology until he is forced to confront the fact that this way can't save his people, so he starts with an assassination here and there, then a kunai lodged in a guy's back. Eventually, these relatively small steps forward escalate into ruthlessly destroying entire enemy camps by any means necessary. These methods prove to be incredibly effective at combating the invaders, so the Ghost further envelops himself in them. How could you argue against him when his methods are the only reason the Mongols are facing any form of opposition at all? To a normal samurai, their clan's prestige is what truly matters to them. Shimura never feels the tug of abandoning his code because what's truly important to him doesn't require him to do so. In fact, the code is fundamental to maintaining this. How can you go around saying the samurai are morally superior warriors who embody the values everyone should strive towards when you break these very ideals in order to maintain your power? Then the facade that allows them to maintain this stranglehold crumbles away, and all that's left is the powerful minority versus the weak majority. With this scene out of the way, there isn't a whole lot left to cover in terms of story. Act 3 is aptly called Kill the Khan because that's all you really do. The main narrative is kind of crescendoed, and the Khan's death feels more like tying up loose ends than anything else. Knowing this, I'm going to lay out what the rest of this video is going to cover. I'll be speaking about all the major character side quests up until their conclusions, what happens in Act 3, and then wrapping everything up with a big conclusion. Sound good? I hope so, cause I'm doing it anyway. Sensei Ishikawa, my teenager-obsessed teacher, how ya been? All of Ishikawa's quests follow the exact same template during Act 2. You meet up with him, talk about Tomoe and some archer training camps she set up, the two talk on horseback on their way to a camp, they take out the camp, and then have a final talk about what they spoke about earlier. The actual gameplay isn't really all that important here, and it's certainly nothing unique, so I won't be covering it. What is valuable are the conversations the teacher and pupil have. The first mission in Act 2 focuses on the expansion of Tomoe's character and whether or not Ishikawa has what it takes to kill his old student. You learn the reason the sensei attacked Tomoe was because she agreed to help use his teachings to help a group of assassins with their target. Ishikawa, having found this out, attempts to kill her in retaliation. Jin sees this as a bit harsh, but the archery master counters by saying Tomoe was a born killer. The game then backs this up by showcasing the groups of innocents the former pupil helped the Mongols murder, saying they are drunk on killing and lack discipline. Confronted with this damning evidence, Jin agrees she must be stopped, but wonders if the man before him is capable of it, noting how he didn't notice Tomoe's true nature until it was too late. After a brief assault on a Mongol archery camp, Ishikawa vows to end Tomoe, and then tells Jin to never question whether he has the strength to do what must be done. Not much really happens during this quest. It's mostly used as a setup for expanding Tomoe's character, essentially damning her as a violent psychopath who gets an adrenaline rush from murdering others. The next quest is named The Ghost and the Demon Sensei. This is a pretty accurate title considering the contents of it. The main problem is that Tomoe is attacking convoys and then laying down notes saying the ones who actually perpetrated the violence were Jin and the sensei. Honestly, this isn't really all that important, and mostly serves as a metaphor for Ishikawa's actions during the mission. Sensei allows one of these convoys to be ambushed so he can use it as a way to track down another archery camp and hopefully find Tomoe. The other example is when the two samurai make their way to the camp, all they find is a woman who is being used so the Mongols can ambush them. It turns out this woman was asked to be a scout by Sensei Ishikawa days earlier. The main purpose of this mission is to harken back to a point being made during Act 1, that Ishikawa's obsession is causing him to perform some morally gray deeds and that he may not be all that different from Tomoe. Yet again, there really isn't all that much else to say here. Nothing new is being introduced, as the sensei has already demonstrated he doesn't exactly have the best character. The final Act 2 quest is pretty much the same song and dance we've seen previously. You learn Tomoe lied about her past and ran with a bandit group before becoming the demon's student. Ishikawa is shocked by this, even though he's been saying this whole time that the girl is a born killer with a taste for bloodshed who needs to be put down. Then when Jin yet again questions whether he has the drive to perform the act, he meanders about, not giving a straight answer. The two yet again fight off another Mongol camp, only this time Tomoe makes an appearance. Jin chases after her until they reach the edge of a cliff. Both students have a brief discussion where Tomoe basically says the sensei can't be trusted, and then jumps off the cliff. For something that is supposed to be the finale for Act 2, this mission was a bit underwhelming. All it does is repeat the same "are you sure you can kill Tomoe" line, and then has the bandit questioning whether Ishikawa can be trusted. The only revelation is that Tomoe was a bandit, but even then, it's not as if it really changes anything. She already turned her back on everything she knew, and is crusading around the island killing her own people. I'm sorry, that's way more damning. Act 3 finally decides to take a different approach by shoving Ishikawa out of the spotlight and instead shining it on his former pupil. However, before that, there's one scene that I need to go over. You meet up with the demon sensei, and surprisingly enough, an emotional scene about his regrets ensues, speaking about how he loves what mastering the bow has allowed him to do, but that in his dedication, he lost something in return. He desperately wanted to make Tomoe the heir to his legacy. She was to be his way of making up for the one thing he lacked in life. This moment feels like the first time Ishikawa is being genuine with us. All the lies and half-truths have faded away because despite his best efforts, Jin found out anyway. All that's left of the man are his regrets and his duty. I don't think it's going to come off as a surprise that I believe Ishikawa's quest isn't particularly good, but this scene is the exception. Alright, so it's time for some quality time with Tomoe. But before that, here's my disclaimer. The setup for this quest is absolutely ridiculous. After this conversation with the archery master, the game just sends you to a random point on the map where you meet Tomoe. Okay, there's a little more context than that. What Jin is supposed to be doing is searching for her by himself. The random location is a dead Mongol convoy that Jin initially believes the sensei cleared out. Tomoe, or Matsu, appears saying she met Ishikawa and that he would return to her home in a few days. You spend the remainder of the quest mostly following Matsume as she checks her snares for food. The reason why the setup is so bad is because it feels incredibly contrived. Jin just so happens to stumble upon this random convoy in the middle of nowhere and then starts chatting with Tomoe. The entire point of this questline is finding this girl, and now we're just stumbling upon her with her hakama half-tied? Anyway, how about I focus on the conversation going on here because it's actually interesting. Tomoe spends the time masquerading as a peasant who is curious about the samurai. She asks Jin questions like what it's like to hold the power of life and death in one's hand, and comments about how the ghost is far kinder than she initially expected. She even shares her dream of wanting to escape to the mainland and starting up an inn where her employees will rob the rich tenants blind. Tsushima makes it pretty obvious from the get-go that this Matsu is actually Tomoe. Finally getting to learn who she is from her own mouth rather than from Ishikawa feels refreshing and adds some much needed character to her. It's a blatant attempt to humanize someone the game has spent the entire questline trying to demonize. I would say this was handled effectively, and by the end of this mission, I saw this girl in a brighter light. The only criticism I have is how it ends. Jin confronts her about being Tomoe, and in an effort to stop him from killing her, the pupil discloses that the Mongols turned against her, and that she has information about a big attack the invaders are planning. Instead of asking for more information in order to verify what she said is true, the ghost just storms off, saying he'll talk it over with Sensei Ishikawa, who is a great distance from them. He doesn't even ask her how they can meet up if they do agree to work with her. Jin just takes this all in stride, and he comes across as a complete idiot. Despite my complaints, the talk with Ishikawa is brief, and the two of you agree to hear Tomoe out. Jin yet again travels to some arbitrary point on the map where he meets with the sensei. He explains that Tomoe somehow contacted him, and that the two of you are going to meet up with her. Ishikawa says there are only two options, either she's telling the truth or she's leading them to an ambush. While he is right about this, his handling of the situation is illogical. If there is a trap, the two of them should be discussing their countermeasures. Perhaps Ishikawa could have surveyed the location earlier for potential ambush spots? None of this is done, and the two just agree that if it is a trap, they'll just handle it. Reaching the area, Tomoe immediately spots the two of them because of course she does, and then finally reveals some information about this big attack. The Mongols are going to attack Amugi Cove, a bandit city, and she wants her help in stopping it because the Khan betrayed her, so she's taking her archers back. As if on cue, the Mongols ambush the three of them by announcing their presence with the blow of a horn. Apparently, this planning idiocy has become a virus that has infected everyone on the island. What follows is the game further attempting to undo all of the demonization it spent all of Act 1 and 2 doing in the span of a couple minutes. The two samurai question the rogue on her actions, and she justifies them in what feels like a half-baked way. She agreed to help the Mongols in the initial camp she was taken prisoner in because the civilians were being tortured and she offered them a quick death. Also, when given the option of being tortured and killed herself, or joining the Mongols, she chose to live. Both her reasoning and how this is executed are heavily flawed. This is the final quest out of 9, and 7 of them have been about how Tomoe is evil and beyond redemption. While I said the 8th mission was a good start, it certainly wasn't enough to justify her actions. I'm willing to accept the reasoning that either I die and these people get tortured, or I kill them quickly and get to live. The problem is she then decides to become a real member of the Mongols. Tomoe doesn't just wait for the right moment to run away. She actively assists in bolstering the people invading her country. She knows they are brutal and perfectly willing to rape and pillage the entire island. While she may argue that she attempted to convince them to save lives, her teaching them the sensei's way of the bow and her planning more camps did far more harm than good. This doesn't even factor in her leading the assault against Hiyoshi Springs because it would upset her old master, or murdering civilians and then blaming Jin and Ishikawa. Look, you don't get to side with the enemy, actively aid in their conquest of your home, and then say JK when it becomes convenient for you. That's why it's so mind-boggling to me that the game basically lets her get away with this. After defeating the attack on Amugi Cove, Tomoe escapes to the mainland on a smuggler's boat. She leaves a note telling Ishikawa that she regrets what happened to them, but what's done is done, and she's out skis. Alright, it's a little more heartfelt than that, but the details are all the same. Ishikawa then completely 180s on his stance of I'll hunt you down to the ends of the earth and just gives up. Everything ends with Ishikawa asking Jin to promise him that he won't become consumed by the ghost like he was with Tomoe. With the events out of the way, now it's time for the wrap-up section. I find myself struggling to really understand what the takeaway from this was. Tsushima is telling me it's to not let your obsessions consume you, but there's so much to this questline. What happened to all the lying and morally gray actions Ishikawa performed? Am I just supposed to forgive Tomoe for all the atrocities she either aided in or stood by and watched? Doing something to ensure your survival is one thing. Actively aiding in the death of others for personal gain is another. The lightning-fast turnaround of Tomoe is evil to Tomoe is misunderstood just doesn't feel justified. Instead, the game spends the final quest showing off the banter between the old master and apprentice for a few pity points. Another problem is Act 2 rehashes the exact same points from Act 1. Tomoe is an evil archery prodigy who enjoys violence. Ishikawa lies to us and manipulates situations. Hey Jin, are you sure you can trust the sensei? Seriously, it's just the exact same points with some minor details sprinkled in. With these glaring issues and the lack of a real tangible message, I can't help but rate the sensei's hunt for Tomoe negatively against the game. With Ishikawa's story put to rest, let's move forward to a character you all know that I love. The force of nature that is Lady Masako, baby. I'm going to be far more brief about the events going on in Masako's story, because for all of Act 2, there really isn't much going on here. Every quest follows a similar structure. Jin meets up with Masako, who is searching after the latest name on the list of people involved with her family's murder. Eventually, the two of you confront the individual. They either offer barely any information, or Masako kills them before they are given the chance. Admittedly, there is usually a little tidbit of knowledge gained in an attempt to make the mystery behind her family's killer more intriguing. For instance, in The Thief, the duo find out the killer desires Clan Adachi's heirlooms even though they hold no value. This begs the question, why would someone be interested in these trinkets if they offer no monetary gain? I admit this is an interesting revelation, and I don't really have a problem with it. You're not expected to actually figure out who the killer is until the game reveals it, which is fine. Not every mystery in a story needs to be solvable beforehand. Instead, the events around the puzzle need to be interesting and draw the viewer in. I was never invested in Masako's story to begin with, so this style doesn't really work for me. I will admit this is a personal viewpoint. If you found yourself engrossed in the murder machine's plight, perhaps these quests were enjoyable. I already explained earlier in the video my reasons behind why I'm not invested, and since this video is already over 2 hours long, I won't repeat myself. The final two quests in Masako's story are important, so they require a full examination. The 8th quest has Masako chasing after a monk called Junshin. It really wasn't that important, but the majority of the Avenging Goddess's quest have this guy making a brief appearance. He doesn't play a major role, and is usually only there to divulge some information. Usually he's unwilling to tell Masako because her fire-breathing, revenge-driven rhetoric doesn't translate well when asking people for assistance. This leaves Jin playing the translator so the two of them can get anywhere. Vengeance, the character, receives word that Junshin was contacted by the person who murdered her family, so Masako immediately assumes his guilt and wants his blood on her sword. Jin, being the level-headed guy that he is, tells the machine that they can't just kill someone off of suspicion alone. They have to talk to him and confirm the story. Masako gives her word that she will allow this, and then on the horse ride over immediately starts talking as if she never agreed, and will murderize him the moment she gets the chance. Once the two of them finally do find Junshin, to just about everyone's shock, Masako moves to kill him. Jin doesn't stand for this and comes to his defense. With the two warriors at odds, Masako sees no other option but to kill Jin. Yes, you heard me correctly. Jin, the guy who has been faithfully helping her avenge her family for the entire game, gets in her way one time because she's acting completely unreasonable, and her immediate response is, F it, dude's gotta die. This isn't some fight where Masako is only trying to subdue Jin. No, she's literally trying to kill the poor guy. When I first saw this, I just started laughing. Now I realize that may not be the most appropriate response to this kind of scene, but it's true nonetheless. I had to laugh because otherwise I would have just gotten angry. Masako's actions here are absolutely absurd and completely unjustifiable. I don't think Ghost of Tsushima is trying to justify them either, but the issue I see here is what's the point of this moment? Masako gave her word that she would talk to the monk, and now she's fighting us to the death. The only thing I can come up with is how it highlights her obsession with her family's killer. It's become her entire reason for existing, and without that she's nothing. I can respect the narrative, but I see this as just going too far. I don't mind Masako being an uncompromising revenge-driven machine in the vacuum of her quest because it makes sense. I'm sure anyone would want to avenge their family, but to so quickly and mercilessly attempt to end your friend's life for such little resistance is just absurd. It's not as if her and Jin have been at odds with one another before. Sure, they had some minor conflicts where the ghost would tell her to essentially calm down and think rationally, but even then it wasn't anything deserving of this. I don't care how angry or tormented you are. This just seems unrealistic to me no matter how you spin it. If you factor in the game's theme of I wouldn't be here without my friends, and things start to look worse. How can I feel that this is true when one of my so-called friends tried to literally kill me over nothing? I try to remain as objective as I can in these videos, but this is just too much for me. I disliked everything about this scene, and it left a sour taste in my mouth for the remainder of my playthrough. In the aftermath, this crazy lady doesn't even apologize. She spouts some nonsense about how all she saw were her dead grandbabies, and then tries to equivocate her actions to how Jin feels about Ryuzo. Listen, I'm not buying this garbage. It's either you apologize and admit you have a revenge problem, or I walk.
You still trust me?
Jin, what are you doing? No, we have to take a stand here. There is only so much crazy I can handle.
Masako, don't ever try to kill me again.
I won't. I promise.
Why are you like this? I just want to point out this amazing line. Jin, my man, this isn't something a smart person would ever find themselves saying. So the two of them track down Junshin, and through some tidbits of info, Masako realizes that her sister is the one who murdered her family. Under normal circumstances, I might be sympathetic, but after what just transpired, I could care less. You know, Masako, this sucks, but you know what also sucks? I don't need to say it, do I? With this over with, our ex-best friend tracks down her sister and has her end her own life. Some background details are given to explain the sister's reasoning behind her actions, and that's all she wrote. I don't think I need to say that I didn't enjoy this questline. That much is obvious. Masako isn't a likable character. She's impulsive and never listens to reason. Given her circumstances, perhaps that's justifiable, but it doesn't translate well over to a story where I'm supposed to feel sympathy for a character. The contents of her quest aren't particularly great either. All of Act 1 has you doing the exact same thing over and over again. Act 2 predominantly just has you tailing people, or instead it's just a standard combat encounter. Don't even get me started on how she tried to murder Jin. This video will be another hour long. The murder mystery is fine on its own, but it isn't anything special. This is going to sound harsh, but my overall stance on this questline is that it's terrible, and the game is better off without it. People who have played the game may be thinking, what about Norio's quest? I would respond with, hypothetically speaking, if I didn't cover Norio's quest, what would you do about it? Yeah, that's right, this is my video, and I can cherry pick whatever evidence I want. I mean, this video is already 2 hours, you're telling me you want me to talk even more? Haven't you heard enough of my voice yet? Heck, I'm getting tired of writing and speaking about this game. Potentially to your dismay, I would be remiss not to cover it, mainly because I just spent all this time putting the game down for Ishikawa and Masako, and it wouldn't be fair to not cover the 9-part questline that I actually thought was good. So who is this Norio fella, and how on earth has he not been mentioned once in this entire video? Norio is a warrior monk of Cedar Temple. Yeah, I know, that doesn't really clear up anything. To fill in some details, he's found at the very end of Act 1, once Jin and company retake Castle Kaneda. Him and the rest of his monk allies were captured and forced to live inside a makeshift prison. This prison was a claustrophobic pit that housed more men than one may initially think possible. The pit would often be covered, permitting no light whatsoever. This created a darkness so overwhelming that the men couldn't even see the hands in front of their faces. Slowly, the Mongols would lottery a random monk, freeing them from their confinement, but inflicting unknown horrors onto them as the price of freedom. Norio describes screaming and the smell of burnt flesh in case your imagination needed a little stimulating. One of these men was Norio's brother, Enjo, better known as Enjo the Guardian, a famous monk known throughout Tsushima. This cycle continued until the only man that remained was Norio himself. It was at this time that Jin retook Castle Kaneda and freed the man from his prison, but opened his world to a whole new set of pain. The events described here would be enough to drive any person mad. The fact that Norio still has all of his mental faculties is a testament to his strength of will. However, this treatment has left wounds that will reopen time and time again throughout his life. Perhaps now you have a better understanding of the being known as Norio, the warrior monk of Cedar Temple. Monks are typically known for their wisdom, knowledge, and peaceful nature. Tsushima plays into this stereotype, so you can imagine Norio embodies at least some of these characteristics. I think this is best personified by one of Norio's lines when you first meet him.
We will avenge your brother, Norio. All the monks who died here.
I don't seek revenge, but I will fight for peace.
After everything he's been through, it is truly impressive that he can still utter those words. I'm not sure if I would have the same strength of character. Norio's treatment, his survivor's guilt, and his philosophy are the key elements of this questline. The goals of Jin and Norio throughout this 9-part series are to rescue the regular monks of Cedar Temple, restore the strength of Kushidera Temple, defend it against Mongol attacks, and finally retake Cedar Temple during Act 3. I've laid it out in this simplistic manner because I won't be delving further into the gameplay sections or the actual events unless they have an impact on the narrative being told here. All I have to say about the gameplay is it's the same core loop I've already spent so much time talking about, so there isn't much else to say. The only real exception is this one moment where Jin fires arrows at incense to create a fog in order to assassinate Mongols. This was an interesting idea, and I welcome the attempt at providing something new. Transitioning back to Norio, you learn some more insights into his relationship with his brother while rescuing the monks from Cedar Temple. It isn't directly stated, but it is spelled out to the player that Norio idolized his brother. He saw him as a hero who could achieve victory even in the most dire of scenarios. The warrior monk's life was defined by his brother. They both joined Cedar Temple together, and they completed their training with one another. Norio at one point even reveals his ideal life was growing old with his brother and watching their children play with each other. In contrast to this idolization, Norio views himself in a far more negative light. His brother was the Guardian, known even by Jin just by name. What is Norio in comparison? Just another middle-of-the-line warrior whose deeds aren't even worth mentioning in comparison. Wouldn't the world be a better place if he had died instead of Enjo? Enjo would be far more useful to Jin in every way imaginable. These are the thoughts that anyone would have in Norio's situation, made far worse by his idolization of his brother. If you add on that every other warrior monk of Cedar Temple died in that pit except for Norio, and the pain becomes something too much to bear. During the end of one of his quests, a renowned healer named Hochi died saving Norio from being cut down. During the funeral pyre, Norio shares these thoughts to Jin. The writing here is excellent. As Norio gazes at the pyre housing the body of one of the island's best healers, he can't help but be reminded of his inadequacies. Hochi, someone far more valuable and prestigious, died saving him. His brother Enjo met a similar fate. Norio was not meant to survive his time in the pit. He was chosen to be removed from the nightmare and be introduced what lies beyond it. However, his brother wouldn't allow it, throwing himself onto Norio, begging for him not to be taken away. Eventually, the Mongols relented, only to take Enjo in his place. Hearing this, you realize the death of Hochi triggers this memory in Norio because history is repeating itself. Yet again, someone he views as far better than him is taking his place, dying so that someone like him can live. This only further pushes Norio down the self-deprecation rabbit hole. He doesn't deserve their sacrifice. He should have been the one to die, not them. With this burden thrusted upon him, he feels he has to live for all of their sacrifices, but how does someone live a life for another person? Yet alone every monk that died so he could live, especially when his feet are too small to even fit into the shoes he needs to fill. With this in mind, Norio sets out to accomplish what he believes these men would have done. With the help of Jin, Norio rallies the monks of Cedar Temple and Kushidera Temple, fends off multiple Mongol attacks, and reclaims the stolen statue of the Buddha. The abbot of Cedar Temple, yet again another individual greater than Norio, who could have easily raised the spirits of the other monks, dies before the duo can reach him. This disheartens Norio, but Jin forces him to rise to the occasion and take on the role the abbot would have. He becomes the source of strength for others and perhaps slowly realizes that maybe his feet can fill those shoes. Although every victory has its price, someone can't endure this level of suffering without some kind of change. The invaders killed his brother, murdered Hochi, slew the abbot, abducted his fellow monks, stole the Buddha, attempted to burn down the temple, and then finally destroyed the statue? That's just all of Norio's personal experiences, and doesn't even factor in all the other endless suffering others have had to endure. Eventually you get to a point where you stop seeing these people as human. All they bring is death and destruction, so why should you offer them anything else in return? The only criticism I have of Norio's quest is this transition doesn't feel gradual enough. The events he has to endure offer a perfect opportunity to showcase this, however the game fails to communicate Norio's shift. The Act 2 part of his questline ends with the destruction of the statue. Throughout his time at Kushidera, you see Norio become frustrated with the monks' lack of action against the Mongols, but what you see in Act 3 just doesn't feel earned. What feels like minor frustration transforms into a ruthless tactician in the blink of an eye. This gets pushed into maximum overdrive when you finally retake Cedar Temple, only to find Enjo is in fact alive, but had all of his limbs torn off. Enjo pleads for his brother to put him out of his misery, and Norio hesitantly performs the act. This causes the once kind-hearted monk to embrace the Church of Masako. He hunts down the Mongol general responsible and mercilessly burns down the entire fort, feeling glee from all the screams around him. I like the idea they were going for here. Turning Norio, a kind-hearted giant, into a murderous machine is a powerful story if told well. I think the groundwork is there. Forced to live inside a dark pit while all of his friends and brother are dragged away to be killed. He's then faced with the cruelty of the Mongols time and time again. They attempt to burn down temples, kill peaceful leaders, and destroy the statue of the Buddha. All of this is enough to skew a man's opinion towards the "these monsters don't deserve mercy" viewpoint, with Enjo's death finally pushing him over the edge. I think the real problem is that the game just doesn't effectively communicate this change in Norio. The events make the transition make sense, but his response to them just doesn't highlight this change in him. Act 3 just feels like a completely different guy, and Act 2 didn't do a good enough job foreshadowing the change. If I take a step back to look at all these quest lines as a whole, it's easy to see they all have a similar pattern. Practically all of Ishikawa's and Norio's quests involve you meeting up with them, having a conversation on horseback, and then fighting some enemies. Occasionally they'll mix it up and introduce some combat in the beginning in order to add some extra spice. Masako's quests are different from these two, but all feel exactly the same in comparison to each other. All you do for practically every one of her missions is some combination of trailing some foes, following some tracks, and fighting soldiers. The most common one being following some goons. The reason I never felt it was necessary to talk about the gameplay aspects of these quests is because none of them supply anything mechanically unique whatsoever. The only exception here would be the early Ishikawa quests, because at least these focus on introducing new mechanics through the bow. So if the actual gameplay elements of a quest don't have anything worth speaking about, then all that's left over are the events and context of what you're doing. With the conclusion of all 3 9-part questlines, I'm finally going to move on to what happens during the game's final act. Psych! There are some other character-driven side quests that I haven't covered yet, such as Yunna, Kenji, and Yuriko, but with the exception of Yunna, I don't think they're that fundamental to the experience. I greatly enjoyed Kenji's antics, but his minor story doesn't matter all that much. Yuriko's quest does a great job highlighting the relationship between Jin's dad and himself, but yet again this element of the ghost's character feels like a nice little side plot. Yunna's focuses more on her past, and the struggle she had to endure after leaving Yarikawa. The reason why I view this as important doesn't have anything to do with Yunna, instead it's all about Jin. During their time together, Jin is the most ruthless he's ever been. He decapitates 3 men and puts their heads on a pike in order to drive fear into the hearts of the invaders. This is all done at the behest of Yunna, who drives him to complete these tasks. I like the story the game is trying to tell here with the samurai's character, but it never really goes anywhere. Jin's change here exists in a vacuum. He commits some questionable acts, but then never does anything remotely on this level for the rest of the game. The real reason I'm bringing this up is because it relates back to what the central theme of Act 3 is. It's something that we've seen multiple times in this video alone. The idea that no one should become too engrossed in their own obsessions. Ishikawa wanted Tomoe to make up for his failure to leave behind a legacy. When that backfired, he latched on to bringing her to justice at all costs. Masako's entire existence has become hunting down the people who butchered her loved ones. Norio transitions from a monk who would never fight for revenge to that being his entire reason for living. So of course the question has to be asked, what about Jin? Has his crusade against the Mongols tainted his goal of protecting the people of Tsushima? Has he become a slave to his own obsession? Well, I don't think that's the case. I don't think the Jin we see during Yunna's questline is the same character we see throughout the remainder of the game. During his time with Tomoe, he treats bandits with respect. Even though they're stealing, he understands that they're starving. They aren't necessarily bad themselves, but drastic circumstances can drive a person to perform actions they wouldn't normally commit. When Norio rampages through the Mongol fort, Jin is in shock. Even he has never done something to this level. The point is, I don't believe Jin has lost his way. Everything I just described are his actions during Act 3. This depicts a man who is still capable of compassion and understanding. Perhaps you may point to the attack on Castle Shimura, arguing that the ghost went too far, and this was his breaking point. My point of contention with this line of thinking is, was poisoning the Mongols' drinks truly all that immoral? The justification Jin gives is it saves the lives of his people by not forcing them to die in a struggle to retake the castle. Some people may have a problem with the use of poison, as it tends to have a stigma associated with it. But I have to beg the question, is poisoning your enemy any different from cutting them down with a sword? Well, that depends. If the poison is causing them to suffer a prolonged and painful death, then perhaps the answer is yes. But if it's quick, I don't see much of a difference. Stabbing someone in the heart and injecting them with poison that kills them instantly really aren't any different. Both accomplish the same task of a quick and relatively painless death. So if the poison used isn't really any different from a traditional cut from a blade, then what is the problem? Is it the fact that he snuck in like a thief? Well, we've been doing that the entire game. What's different here? I think an important question to ask is, why a bloody siege where countless people die is more acceptable than sneaking in and killing all your foes from the shadows? Perhaps there is no correct answer. My problem is how the game handles this question. For the entirety of Act 1 and 2, Ghost of Tsushima's message is the samurai way is broken. It can't fend off the Mongol invasion, and it certainly can't lead to the suffering of less people. The only way to fend off these invaders is to introspect and adapt your own strategies. Denying that is like beating your head against a brick wall in hopes of it falling down. However, the message changes during Act 3. All the side quests come to an end, and each one of them has a similar theme. Don't let your obsession consume you. The game is going back against everything it has stood for so far and asking the question, is what Jin is doing right? The big issue I have is the entire time the game has been constantly reinforcing the opposite. You can't just spend 85% of your game building up a core central theme and then just turn your back on it. I'm not going to buy that all of a sudden maybe Shimura has a point and everything I've done over the course of this 40-hour game is wrong. If you want this kind of twist, it needs to be handled with care. Time needs to be invested in order to make this feel natural. There needs to be a slow transition from Jin doing whatever he can to save his people to him having his hatred for the Mongols blind him to his initial cause. I never once felt that Jin didn't have the people of Tsushima in mind whenever he did anything. Perhaps the only exception to this would be Yunna's quest, but I have to stress that this version of Jin only exists in this vacuum. If he started to act this way over time, perhaps I would have felt differently about the final act. Looking at the actual events, after Jin poisons the entire garrison, he gives himself up to Shimura and is to be executed on orders from the shogun. With the help of Kenji, he escapes and makes his way to Yunna. Once he reaches their meeting location, Jin finds the village has been ransacked by Mongols using the same poison he used against them earlier. He gets injured, and Yunna rescues him for the second time. This is the one point I haven't addressed yet. Has the ghost gone too far because now the Mongols are using the poison to wipe out entire villages? Well, I don't think it really changes anything. The invaders were already using differing tactics in order to win the war. They were still going around enslaving the people of Tsushima at an incredibly fast rate. Threatening civilians with a sword versus poison is kind of the same threat. In both scenarios, you're putting their lives at stake. Is there really a difference between poisoning an entire village versus stabbing all the residents? In terms of combat, I'll admit the poison may give the Mongols a new advantage, but this is how war works. You come up with a new innovation to combat the enemy, and through being exposed to it, they eventually find a way to either replicate or improve upon it. This happens all the time throughout history. Do we look at the invention of firearms in the same way that Tsushima treats poison? What's the alternative? Not taking advantage of this discovery and just letting your country get taken over? Don't people in power have an obligation to protect the people under them? I will admit there is a point where this philosophy can go too far. Once you start creating weapons that cause lasting environmental effects, or their very use involves civilian casualties, there starts to be an issue. If the poison the Mongols were using impacted the land, or was a gas they used to cover entire villages, I may have had a few more qualms. However, since it is relegated to being used through injection, its damaging capabilities are far lesser. So even with this point, I still don't think Jin has gone too far. So with my defense of Jin's actions, I only really have a few things left to cover before the game is finally over. Wasn't sure I'd actually make it this far. As I've said before, Act 3 is pretty short, so not much of important really happens for most of it. After being rescued by Yunna, the two companions create a home base in Jogaku Temple, take out an enemy fort so the rest of their allies can reach the northern section of the island, survey the camp where the Khan is staying, plan a final attack against him, sneak into Castle Shimura in order to ask for Shim's help, and finally one big assault against the Khan. Securing the temple and fighting the Mongol fort aren't particularly eventful, it's the same combat encounters you've done the entire time. The fort feels like a third rehash of the fight through a well-garrisoned area. Tsushima does break it up with some stealth sections and minor climbing sections, but at the end you're again running in with assistance for a big hectic battle. There's even a third Hwacha section where Jin blows everyone up. After this, Yunna and Jin have to sneak into the Mongol camp without being noticed in order to plan their method of attack. Why does the game suddenly think it's necessary to do this now and not at Kaneda? Well, that's because it has some plot to drop on us. The Khan is planning a massive attack against the mainland using poison, so now Jin and Ko are in a rush to defeat him before he sets sail. Khotan leaving introduces some narrative questions. What was the point of even attacking the island in the first place? I would assume so the Mongols had a tactical location to press future attacks on the country. He couldn't hold Castle Shimura or Kaneda. What makes him think he can attack all of Japan? His army seems to be spread out all across Tsushima, and he no longer even controls key points of interest. Now that I'm thinking about it, why didn't he just finish them off at Castle Shimura? It makes no sense to retreat and forfeit that gain. There is no way Yarikawa and the Shogunate reinforcements make Jin stronger than the entire Mongol army. And none of this makes any tactical sense at all. There doesn't seem to be any semblance of a plan from the warlord for his invasion. In the beginning, the Mongols were this overwhelming force that destroyed the samurai and took over the entire island in what felt like a matter of days. Then Jin comes in with his iron determination and upturns every gain. In the end, the Mongols control only a small section of the northern part of the island, but we're still meant to believe this guy is a major threat? That's another reason why the poison is introduced. Outside of attempting to frame Jin's actions in a negative light, it's used to make the Khan actually feel like a credible threat again. Oh god, look out, this dude is highly effective poison and he's not afraid to use it. Look, if Khotan can't even beat Shimura and his ragtag army, then what hope does he have against all of Japan? The dude only has so much poison. I think it's obvious the writing here is rushed and handled poorly. The poison is more of a plot device to create artificial stakes and push the idea that Jin may have gone off the deep end. The strongest narrative point has always been the tug of war Jin feels between maintaining the samurai code and protecting the people of Tsushima. The invasion itself has always been placed second in comparison, used more as a driving force to push this primary narrative than anything else. Once Jin finally confronts his uncle, there simply isn't enough invested to pull together a strong ending to the invasion. It certainly doesn't help that we've been undermining the Mongols by handing them defeat after defeat throughout the story. So with that out of the way, there are only 3 more events worth focusing on before the credits roll. The first one is sneaking into Castle Shimura. In a change of pace, I don't care for the narrative behind this mission, and instead want to focus on the gameplay. This isn't the first time the title has done this, but Jin isn't allowed to kill any of the samurai soldiers. The player is forced to sneak around without being seen for a substantial length of time. I don't think this is particularly groundbreaking or unique, but it's something Tsushima doesn't employ very often. It's one of the few times I actually felt like there were consequences to getting caught. I also couldn't just kill any of the foes in my way, so there was an added level of challenge in deciphering a method to get around. I wish the game had actually implemented this style of gameplay more often, as I found it to be pretty enjoyable. It sure beats the endless mountain of standard combat encounters the game is riddled with. So the ghost leaves a message detailing to Shimura where the Khan is and when they are going to attack in hopes of his uncle aiding in the assault. With all the preparations now completed, Jin and his allies move to attack the Khan. The final battle against the Mongols is an appropriate last hurrah, even if the events around it don't really make much sense. You begin with all of the key side characters you've assisted over the course of the game. For once I actually felt like everyone was pulling their weight as we collectively demolished the Mongol forces. Eventually Jin goes solo because the game can't resist the urge to have him do most of the work, and Shimura shows his love for his nephew by showing up to help despite their differences. The ghost makes his way to a central courtyard where he confronts the Khan. Even though the threat Khotan represents is shallow at best, this is still Jin's greatest adversary. The man behind all the pain and suffering he's had to endure, the reason why his clan was dissolved, and why he can no longer call the man who raised him father. The boss fight itself is a 2-pronged battle. One is the traditional duel that introduces an entire new moveset for the Khan. It would have been a travesty if this wasn't the case, and I'm glad the game took the time to create a new challenge for the big finale. After a struggle between the two, the Khan runs onto his ship and the ghost pursues. This version is something I wish the game did more of. Jin has all these ghost weapons, but once he enters a duel, he completely forgets about them. I understand in terms of gameplay it would completely break the fight, but not being able to toss a kunai or sticky bomb does feel odd. Instead, Ghost of Tsushima creates a unique fight where the Khan essentially acts as a super foe that the player has to contend with while fighting other soldiers. You bombard the guy with arrows, toss kunai, throw bombs. Apparently Khotan can take a beating, so blast away. Alongside the warlord are waves of his soldiers that the player has to contend with. Like I mentioned when going over combat, Tsushima relies on having multiple foes during encounters because solo fights on their own are too simple. This adds on that juggling act I'm so fond of, and makes the final boss feel like a real challenge. The traditional duel plays like an honorable contest between two people, but this is a ghost battle between two men who are willing to play every trick they can in order to win. This was a great conclusion to the con. Once the con is defeated, there's only one plot thread left unresolved: the relationship between uncle and nephew. The last moments these two share with one another are powerful, moving, and beautiful. This is a connection that has been permanently severed, despite neither party wanting it. Jin is saddened by this. He loves his uncle even through their disagreements. Shimura feels the same way, but you can tell there is also anger and resentment boiling underneath the surface. He truly believed he could have won the war using the same tactics the Japanese had been following for generations. He sees what Jin did as a betrayal of not just their code, but of him. If Jin had rejected the ghost, the war would have been won, and they could have stood together as father and son. There's also the idea that Jin openly defied his lord. He put into question the laws that bound their society, that keep their civilization running. This is a direct threat on the status quo, on Shimura's way of life. You can't have people getting ideas about defending themselves, because then they'll realize they don't really need the samurai. If they don't need these warriors for protection, then why are they the ones hoarding all the wealth? The samurai weren't the ones who saved them from the Mongols. They saved themselves when the samurai failed. The so-called peasants finally begin to realize that maybe this hierarchical contract isn't designed to work in their favor. I can respect Shimura's emotions toward losing Jin, but his point about people learning to defy their masters just sounds like privileged whining to me. I don't want to harp on this point for too long because I've already said my spiel. What I want to add is the game seems to be taking Shimura's point as proper justification, that the ghost has started a revolution in societal thought, and that this is a bad thing. The primary argument for this is the hint that the peasantry will grow violent and lead to a civil war on the island. Now in general, I believe violence should always be the absolute last road to go down when attempting change. Any and all peaceful methods should be used first. One of the biggest problems with the time period and feudalism in general is accomplishing a peaceful change in societal structure is practically impossible. Nothing quite says know your place, worm, like killing you and your family in the middle of the night, am I right? Shimura may be arguing a violent civil war between the peasantry and aristocracy is a bad thing, but if there's no other way to improve the lives of these people, then in the words of Jin, do what you have to. The fact that the game seems to be justifying feudalism here seems like another weak attempt to paint Jin's actions in a negative light in order to come across as profound. With my final point about feudalism being bad out of the way, how about I get on with the scene? You can see the symbolism behind Shimura taking Jin to his family's cemetery. He intends to kill the ghost, and brings him here so that he may die alongside his clan. For what it's worth, at least his uncle wants to grant him the best possible death he can manage. The two continue their verbal spat about the ghost and each other's actions throughout the game, but it's all meaningless. They are permanently divided, destined to remain apart forever. A final haiku is written, the only other haiku I felt was worth writing, and finally, father and son, nephew and uncle, do battle. There isn't much to say about the fight itself. It isn't all that different from any of the other traditional duels you've done in the past. Although, I'll admit the music, presentation, and emotion behind it far surpass anything that has come before it. One detail worth pointing out is Shimura is the only person you ever duel that doesn't finish you off. Instead, he stares down at you as the screen fades to black. A nice little touch, showcasing his love and respect for his nephew. Once the fight is over, the player is left with one final decision: kill your uncle or spare him. This decision is one final choice between samurai and ghost. Killing Shimura and honoring him with a warrior's death is a traumatic but beautiful moment that portrays the bonds between these two, showing that Jin still has some honor in him and can't bring himself to completely forgo his samurai past. Sparing your uncle rejects this final test of honor, fully engulfing yourself in the ghost persona, not even willing to give Shimura the honorable death he craves. Symbolically donning the ghost mask and walking away on a cruel path that offers no praise, no glory, and no honor. With the climactic emotional music in the background, the credits roll, and Ghost of Tsushima finally comes to a close. With the ending of the game, marks the closing moments of the video as well. I think Tsushima is an overall good game. Its story, while not flawless, is executed well up until the third act. Characters are a bit of a mixed bag. I've lined out why I don't care for Masako or Ishikawa, but I do believe the game gets it right with its key cast, that being Shimura, Yunna, and Jin, ultimately portraying the story of a man who is being pulled between two walks of life. His uncle represents the safe and comfortable path he has known his entire life, while Yunna challenges him to question his held beliefs and come to truly understand what it means to protect his people. I will admit, Yunna certainly isn't perfect. The methods used during her own quest are the darkest the game ever gets. If they really wanted to go down the path of questioning whether Jin went too far, there really needed to be a slow transition to this more rage and violence-induced way of fighting. With the point being, is this cruelty and intimidation really necessary for saving the people of Tsushima, or is it just to satisfy your own hatred? Act 3 doesn't introduce this effectively whatsoever, and in general is a rushed experience. Even with these criticisms, I still think most of the story is great, at least in terms of video game writing, which doesn't really compare to most traditional stories anyway. The biggest qualms I have are with the gameplay. No matter how good your narrative is, unless the game is structured in a way that makes gameplay an afterthought, there needs to be a strong loop. Tsushima does have this for about all of Act 1, but then never introduces anything new afterwards. It's the same song and dance that was already beginning to grow stale during the end of the first act for the remainder of the game. Quests largely felt like I was doing the same exact thing every time. I would meet up with a character, talk with them while riding through the land, eventually do some combination of sneaking around or fighting, and then conclude with another discussion. This pattern follows for literally every single 9-part character side quest. The non-specific missions, such as protecting the sake brewery from the Mongols, for the most part were meaningless fetch quests, or just had the player riding around and fighting a wave of enemies. They didn't offer anything mechanically unique, and their stories weren't interesting enough to make them feel like anything special. I've already gone over my viewpoints on all of the other gameplay mechanics, so if you've made it this far, I'll spare you the details. You hopefully already know them. One final point I wanted to make is about the graphics of the game. At times I felt like the game was cinematic with how some of the cutscenes were depicted, as if I was watching a movie instead of playing a game. This is definitely a boon for Tsushima, but whenever I play something that has ultra-realistic graphics, I can't help but feel, was the trade-off worth it? What is being thrown away in favor of making the game look so fantastic? Despite what may appear to be our obsession with how awe-inspiring a game looks, ultimately it tends to not be the reason we put something on a pedestal. Look at Undertale for instance, universally loved by just about anyone that's played it, hailed by many as one of the best games they've ever played, and it looks like it was made by a child playing around in MS Paint. Even The Last of Us or Doom Eternal aren't considered great because they look amazing. They're loved for their stories or stunningly amazing gameplay. Perhaps in this regard, video games are just like people. We may look amazing, but if you're shallow and subpar, eventually you're going to be seen for who you truly are. I wouldn't call Tsushima shallow, but I can't help but feel that this could have been a masterpiece if more time was spent where it really counted, rather than on the visuals. I know my opinion on Ghost of Tsushima has been a controversial take. It doesn't surprise me that this game is loved by so many people. The first act is probably on Game of the Year level in terms of quality. People get drawn into this and are willing to look past some of the future design problems or stumbles because they've already experienced such a high level of polish for a significant length of the game. I don't think many people are going to agree with me. For some reason, gamers tend to have this propensity to feel personally attacked whenever criticizing a game, especially one that they hold in such high regard. I'll say again that if I haven't changed your mind, I at least hope I made you think more critically. Maybe you've come to your own realizations while watching this. If that's the case, then I can say with a smile that this 2-hour monster has accomplished something. So this final section is just a thank you for watching. I know sitting through a movie-length video on some random guy critiquing a game doesn't cause most people to jump with joy. I'm not sure why you stuck around till this point, but yet again I just wanted to say thank you so much. It means a lot. As much as I wish they did, 3-hour-long videos don't grow on trees. An extreme amount of effort goes into developing them. If you're listening to this part of the video, it hopefully means you got some enjoyment out of this project. If that's the case, I would like to ask you to subscribe or leave a like, as it really helps a small channel grow. Alright, I guess this is goodbye. No, I would like to think a more fitting phrase would be, see you again.